This is the story of a young woman described in many ways. Long, raven hair cascading to her waist, captivating blue eyes that shimmered like stars. Owen Lilith was the most beautiful woman in the Wilma Empire and the wife of Duke Fairwin Carlisle. Despite her breathtaking beauty, beneath the surface lay the persona of a fiery wife, feared by the entire Carlisle dukedom. Owen Lilith had always been overbearing, disrespectful, and easily angered, but her greatest mystery was that she loathed her husband more than anything in the world, even wishing to have nothing to do with him. This captivating tale begins with a man sitting in a chair. He is Duke Fairwin Carlisle, the very husband of Owen Lilith. In the grand hall where the Duke sat, his advisors began inquiring about the state of his marriage, as they had not heard any news. During these 4 years of marriage, the gentleman reminded everyone that their marriage contract with the Wilma Empire had not yet expired. One of the advisors stated that if his relationship with the Duchess was strained, Fairwin should inform him now, as it was the opportune time to request an early separation from the Emperor. Faced with these peculiar questions, Fairwin held his head in his hands, suggesting they might as well ask Owen directly about their relationship, as she had been avoiding him. One advisor bluntly mentioned that no one could endure Owen's explosive temper, so they should immediately submit a divorce petition and find him another wife. The gentleman, angered by these words, declared that breaching the contract would be extremely disrespectful diplomatically, and since the contract had only 1 year remaining, it was best to endure. It turned out that throughout the Carlisle family history, very few heirs had ascended to the dukedom at the age of 25, and the Duke was currently 25. The Duke's father was 40 when he was born, and Fairwin stated that he was capable of having children, but the time was not right. Fairwin refused to listen to any more of this talk and immediately dismissed all his advisors from the hall. The meeting had been fruitless. The Duchess summoned her advisors to meet with her. They were puzzled by this, assuming she would once again task them with collecting the next installment of wealth for the Wilma Empire, causing the peasants to suffer further. An ally from Wilma asked Owen why she had called them. Owen looked at her advisors with a mysterious gaze and replied that from now on, they would no longer send wealth to the Wilma Empire. She also instructed them to inform the peasants that she would no longer seize their wealth and apologize for her foolish actions stemming from an excessive attachment to her family. This entire story unfolded within a novel titled Fairwin and Stella, which Kate, an ordinary cashier at a store, was reading. Just then, a customer approached her, asking to check out. Not long ago, she was an aspiring singer working a part-time job. She often woke up in the hospital due to her demanding schedule. Studying and working from early morning drained almost all her energy. That day, Kate collapsed behind the cash register once again, but this day was different. Her head hit the tile floor, and she died. When she opened her eyes, she saw a young man in bed, sleeves rolled up, shirt unbuttoned, revealing a slender physique. The man had beautiful platinum blonde hair. This stranger, sleeping beside her on the bed, filled Kate with utter confusion. She didn't understand where she was, why she was in bed, or who this man was, as she had clearly been at work. Out of fear, she closed her eyes, hoping that when she opened them again, everything would return to normal. Suddenly, the Duke leaned over her with his well-built frame and touched her head, pleading for her to wake up. The man was deeply worried about his wife. Meanwhile, Kate was still contemplating how to handle this situation. She decided to wait for the stranger to leave before trying to figure out what was happening. As she pondered, the Duke suddenly kissed her. Kate abruptly opened her eyes, startling the Duke, whose gaze seemed to hold a trace of panic. The Duke immediately called out her name, Owen. Hearing this name, Kate grew even more frightened and lost consciousness again, but this time within another body. The next morning, the mistress's room was surrounded by maids and a physician. After examining her, the physician declared that the mistress's health was not in any danger, and the servants rejoiced at this news. Kate was awakened by the commotion of the servants. She still didn't understand where she was or why everyone was addressing her this way. Before fainting, Kate had seen a man call her Owen. Now, all the servants were addressing her as the Duchess of Carlisle. She realized she had died and been reborn into the body of Owen Lilith from the novel. In the novel, Owen maintained until the very end that the accusations were unfair, as she, too, was the illegitimate daughter of the defeated Wilma Empire, his only daughter, his blood flowing through her veins, and had dedicated her entire life to the Teresa Empire. The royal family, on friendly terms with the Grand Duke, offered her as a gift, and she subsequently married Duke Fairwind Carlisle, the emperor's right-hand man and a highly influential figure in the empire. For years of marriage passed without news of an heir, and rumors spread throughout the Carlisle dukedom that this woman couldn't even fulfill the most basic duties of a duchess. However, right before the contract's expiration, someone poisoned Duke Fairwind Carlisle's wine, and all suspicion immediately fell upon his wife, Owen Lilith, the woman he loathed. It was discovered that she had been illegally transferring the Carlisle dukedom's wealth to the Vermilion Duchy. Afterward, the girl was sentenced to death. Owen maintained until the very end that the accusations were unfair. But no one believed her, not even her husband, Duke Fairwind Carlisle, who had once truly loved her. Later, he married Countess Stella Bell, who cared for him with a sincere heart. Kate couldn't understand why she had transmigrated into Owen's body, nor why she had become the notorious villain destined for death. When she realized she was in Owen's body, the anger gradually subsided. She understood that since this was the case, past intense emotions were useless. It was time to live differently than Owen had. Kate, having taken over Owen's body, summoned a servant. A lovely maid approached, and Kate, as Owen, inquired how long she had been married to the Duke. The maid, with a flustered expression, replied that she had been married to the Duke for 5 years and didn't understand why she was asking. Kate decided to live quietly for another year, planning to get a country villa as compensation after the divorce. She dreamt of an independent life after divorcing Duke Fairwind Carlisle. Becoming his ex-wife was all she needed. After some thought, Kate, in Owen's body, concluded that to survive, she had to start doing good deeds and change others' perceptions of her. And the first person whose perception needed changing was, of course, the Duke. As she pondered this, a gentleman entered the room. The servants immediately bowed to him, and Kate understood why they called him master. After all, he was Owen's husband. As soon as Fairwind entered, he asked Owen how she was feeling. Kate realized that when she opened her eyes, Duke Fairwind Carlisle, like a shadow of the past, had been sleeping in front of her. Kate, looking at Fairwind, found his current demeanor completely different from the night before, as if they were two different people. The gentleman's inquiry about Owen's well-being sounded perfunctory, but his intention to leave was unsettling. Suddenly, Owen rushed forward and grabbed the corner of his robe, as if clinging to the last straw, looking gratefully into his eyes. A tense silence filled the room as everyone stared at Owen in shock, wondering what the consequences of her fainting spell would be. In the novel, the primary reason for Owen's murder accusation was her strained relationship with her husband, making her the prime suspect in the poisoning case. At this moment, Kate realized that she had to strive to restore her reputation and improve her relationship with the Duke with every step. Fairwind didn't respond to Kate's actions, simply leaving in silence. The gentleman walked into the library, puzzled, unable to understand what had happened to his wife, wondering if his last conversation with her had led to this situation. Mrs. Tilly stood in front of the library door, summoned by the master. He asked her if Owen's behavior could be due to amnesia, but Mrs. Tilly simply advised him to trust the doctor and wait and see. The maid noticed that the Duchess's personality had become much gentler, as if she had become a different person. After her illness, the Duke was bewildered by these changes. Before, she had always been taciturn, and now she even thanked him. The maid raised an important question. Was the Duchess truly determined to change? But Fairwind flatly rejected this hope, deeming it pointless. After the conversation, the master dismissed the servant, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Owen was cold and heartless, rarely interacting with the residents of the Carlisle dukedom, except when giving orders. She also barely communicated with her husband, and the only servant who had consistently stayed by her side was Mrs. Tilly. Mrs. Tilly decided to ask the Duchess how her lunch was. The reply she received was that the dinner was as delicious as always. But interestingly, during their first meeting, Mrs. Tilly had trembled with nervousness, while now, the Duchess felt that the servants were beginning to understand her. However, she still needed to improve her relationship with Fairwind. While talking with Mrs. Tilly, the Duchess was called to the kitchen. Owen decided to find out why the Duchess was particularly busy today. The maid said it was because the master had decided to dine at home tonight. A few hours later, Owen's maid, Marianne, entered her room to announce that dinner was ready. Kate, in the Duchess's body, noticed the tension on Marianne's face. She couldn't understand why Mrs. Tilly's niece would still be afraid of her. Trying to lighten the mood, Kate turned to Marianne gratefully. Owen instructed Marianne to inform the staff that she would be having dinner with her husband tonight. Marianne replied that such a thing had never happened before, but Owen insisted that making a good impression was important. After asking the maids to help her choose an outfit, Owen asked Marianne if she was afraid of her. Marianne's reply was unexpected. The Duchess had simply changed out of her usual black attire. Owen's mysterious actions made Marianne wary, and she couldn't help but ask if the Duchess was dissatisfied with her work. Owen assured her that everything was fine and told the maid to begin applying her makeup. For 4 years, the Duchess had rarely interacted with the other maids. Aside from Mrs. Tilly, they had only ever seen Owen's stern and indifferent face. But now, she had to gradually convince them that she had changed. When Kate opened her eyes, she was stunned by the makeup in the mirror. She couldn't imagine the real Owen wearing such makeup every day. The Duchess's reaction startled the maids, who fearfully begged for forgiveness. Deciding to wash off the disastrous makeup, Kate resolved to attend dinner without any. Just then, a maid brought in a tray of flowers for Owen to adorn her hair. The new Owen chose Lily of the Valley and tucked it into her hair. Fairwind was already seated at the dining table, waiting for dinner, but the food was inexplicably delayed. He turned to Alfred, who informed him that the Duchess had decided to dine with him and requested he wait a little longer. Fairwind found the idea absurd. Someone who usually ignored him suddenly proposing to dine together struck him as odd. Just then, Owen entered the dining room, announcing that she simply wanted to have dinner with him. After taking her seat, Owen answered his inquiry about her health, saying she had almost fully recovered. Fairwind was surprised. She had never been so forthcoming. He asked why she wasn't wearing makeup, as it was the first time he'd seen her without it since their marriage. Owen explained that the makeup made her face feel tight and irritated her skin, then asked Fairwind if she looked strange. He couldn't recognize her. She had never been like this. He was convinced she was doing this just to torment him. Fairwind admitted that she did look strange, stating she looked better with makeup, and then suggested they begin their meal. Confused, he asked her directly what she was up to. Owen assured him she had no ulterior motives, simply wanting to improve their relationship. Fairwind reminded her they had lived together for 4 years, and asked how she knew he had seen through her charade. The Duchess replied angrily. She simply wanted to fulfill her duties as a wife. The Duke asked if Owen was prepared to fulfill her other promise, but she didn't understand what he meant. He asked if she was prepared to fulfill her obligation to bear children. While everyone admired the appearance of the Emperor's younger brother, Duke Sivfram, it was ultimately Duke Carlisle's unparalleled beauty that captivated everyone. Even after marriage, he was still considered the ideal man. His attention consistently attracted many women in society. They hoped for a divorce after 5 years, but the true way for the Duchess to uphold her honor and dignity was to have a child. Owen didn't want this. She couldn't share a bed with someone she didn't love. She only wanted to peacefully reach the end of their contractual agreement and then divorce. But now she had to have a child. This was the Duke's test, and he didn't expect any other answer. After all, on their wedding night, he refused to mix his bloodline with that of an invader. Having said these words, he left, telling Owen to forget what he had just said. The Duke departed, leaving Owen alone at the dining table. Fairwind told Owen to act normally and stop doing things she hadn't done before. She didn't understand why he had suddenly become angry. Left to finish her dinner alone, she worried that her relationship with Fairwind was now irreparably damaged. As Owen ate, Mrs. Tilly came over and comforted her, advising her not to worry too much. The dejected Duchess admitted she realized how rude she had been to her husband, but she pleaded for her husband to give her another chance. Mrs. Tilly reassured the Duchess, saying that the Duke had noticed her change, but he was simply too busy at the moment. She also noted that the Duke was too exhausted to acknowledge that she had changed. Owen and Mrs. Tilly moved to the summer garden, where they drank tea and reminisced. The Duchess expressed her gratitude to Mrs. Tilly for her care and support during her temporary memory loss, as well as for her many life lessons. She then inquired about the upcoming cultural festival at the Marquis of Celestine's estate, wanting to know the specific date. Owen mentioned she had also heard about the plans, which the maid confirmed. The so-called cultural festival, while ostensibly a celebration for the nobility, was in reality a circus of competitive spending. The scenes decorated by the noble women were worth far more than the lavishly funded arrangements. Owen asked Mrs. Tilly if she could participate in the cultural festival, hoping to change public perception of her through song. She then expressed her desire to find the best orchestra to to accompany her performance. The Duchess suggested forming a choir to accompany her, but she insisted on performing solo, wanting to showcase her talent to everyone at the estate. Mrs. Tilly was surprised, asking why she had hidden her talent until now. 3 days later, the servants reported that the Marchioness of Celestine had learned of the Duchess's preparations for the cultural festival and was astonished. Everyone wondered what had changed in the Duchess, as she had now attracted the attention of high society. Thanks to Mrs. Tilly, rumors of the Duchess's transformation began to spread, and her reputation gradually improved. Owen quietly awaited Fairwind's reaction to these changes, even losing sleep in anticipation. Mrs. Tilly wished her good night and told Owen that there was no need to wait for her husband's return every night, nor should she worry about her health because of it. The Duchess asked the maid what she thought her husband's opinion of Owen was. Mrs. Tilly replied that every night, when Owen waited for Fairwind at the door, he personally carried her back to their bedroom. Owen was incredulous and asked Mrs. Tilly if it was possible someone else had carried her back, but the maid denied it. After hearing Mrs. Tilly's account, Owen concluded that Fairwind didn't dislike her, but she couldn't understand his gentle treatment. He only did it behind closed doors. That evening, Fairwind was working at the Imperial Palace when the Emperor noticed the Duchess of Carlisle's name being frequently mentioned in social circles. Fairwind responded impatiently, saying he was aware of it, as everyone was talking about it. Even the Emperor himself had noticed the Duchess's change, waiting for her husband at the door every night. The Duke couldn't understand why he had to interrupt his work, carry his wife back to their bedroom, and then return to the palace. He thought perhaps she didn't want anyone to see her pursing her lips while she slept, or perhaps she didn't want anyone to see how adorable she looked asleep. Later, he realized even he didn't understand what was happening. He wondered if it was another one of Owen's pranks, or if she had truly changed. The Emperor reminded Fairwind that he had been the same way when he first met his wife. His Majesty announced his decision to attend the cultural festival with the Empress. The Duke cautioned the Emperor that Owen might behave inappropriately, given her past and the fact she had never truly integrated into high society since their marriage. The Emperor was curious to see how Owen would handle the cultural festival, considering she had not only invited the most accomplished pianist but also planned to perform herself. He was also surprised that the Duke was only learning of these things now, despite living under the same roof. The Duke said that Owen was capable of anything now, which worried him. The Emperor suggested to Fairwind that Owen's actions might be a sign of reconciliation, perhaps a promise of better behavior. As he left, the Emperor urged Fairwind not to disappoint him. Perhaps they would have a child with mixed Wilma and Carlisle blood. The next day, the servants informed the Duchess that the main banquet hall was ready, and the piano had been covered to protect it from dust. Owen thanked them. The servants noticed a significant change in the Duchess's personality. With only 3 days left until the event, many noble families were preparing to attend. For Owen, this was an opportunity to prove she wasn't the wicked woman of rumor, but a virtuous wife. Mrs. Tilly came to the Duchess's room with a custom-made gown. Owen couldn't wait to try it on so that any necessary alterations could be made in time. Kate, in Owen's body, took off her dress and walked to the mirror, noting that her figure was quite well maintained. As Kate admired her new body in the mirror, the Duke entered the room. The Duke asked his wife for a moment of her time. Owen, in her nightgown, felt embarrassed to see the Duke. The Duke didn't see anything wrong with it, but Owen insisted on propriety. They talked about the events that hadn't been held at the estate for a long time. Then the Duke asked a question. He wanted to know why Owen had suddenly changed, and if she was ready to truly become different. Faced with her attitude, Owen rejected his words. The Duke, flustered, patted his forehead, blaming Owen for organizing the festival activities. She replied that she was merely fulfilling her duties. She reminded him that he had encouraged her to participate in the preparations. Owen expressed her dissatisfaction, even hinting at possible consequences. As she tried to leave, she stumbled, feeling deeply embarrassed in front of her husband. When she looked up, she found herself on the floor with the Duke on top of her. She asked if he had strange tastes, as she wasn't wearing heavy makeup. Overwhelmed, she screamed as a 2-meter-tall man was pressing down on her. The Duke explained that if he hadn't caught her, she would have dodged him. As before, she retorted that she wasn't dodging him, but but trying to smooth things over. After Owen spoke, the Duke moved even closer. Owen tried to stop Fairwyne, then asked him why he was acting this way. The Duke said she was only using her duties as a pretense to achieve her own goals. His expression unsettled Owen. Owen suggested they go upstairs to talk properly in a more suitable environment. Fairwyne said he wouldn't let her leave until he heard the whole truth. But Owen reiterated that she only wanted to improve their relationship and didn't understand why he couldn't accept that. She then tried to push him away, accidentally undoing his shirt buttons in the process. Fairwyne moved closer, telling her to repeat herself and advising her to stop playing games. Owen denied his accusations, saying she regretted her actions. The Duke didn't understand what she was trying to achieve, and she replied that she was simply fulfilling her duties as the Duchess, fulfilling the marriage contract. The Duke laughed, noting how easily she said it, and accused her of deceiving herself. Owen realized her husband had misunderstood her. The Duke began to suspect there might be another reason, voicing his doubts. He wondered if, throughout their marriage, she had considered him a pathetic waste and was now trying to trick him into easily bearing his child. Owen cried in front of her husband, realizing that even in this situation, her efforts weren't earning his trust. She wondered why she hadn't become a singer, but instead was reborn into the body of the wicked Duchess. All her efforts crashed against the wall of the Duke's distrust. The Duke was shocked to see Owen display emotion, the first time in their 4-year marriage. But Owen responded coldly, saying she was only crying because the tears were flowing involuntarily. The Duke handed her a napkin to wipe them away. He tried to comfort her, saying tears wouldn't change anything. In response, the Duke simply held her hand, offering no verbal reply. Owen, not understanding what was happening, responded with equal coldness. The Duke, unable to bear seeing his wife cry, gently wiped the tears from her face. He then stood up, saying that if there was a misunderstanding between them, she should clarify it for him. He also asked why, after 4 years of doing nothing but angering him, she had decided to change. Owen replied that she deeply regretted causing him suffering, unable to even fulfill the minimum duties of a duchess. She reiterated her desire to make amends by fulfilling those duties, seriously dedicating herself to her role for the remaining year of their 5-year marriage, officially recognized by the Emperor. The Duke then asked about children, but Owen said she hadn't thought about it at all and wouldn't in the future, so he needn't worry. Inwardly, however, she was angered by his perception of her having his children. Unaware of this, Owen said she knew he had married her on the Emperor's orders, but with only a year left, she would live as a true duchess. Afterward, they would divorce, so he'd be better off having children with someone he truly loved. After Owen's explanation, Fairwyne left, saying he accepted her choice. Kate realized her husband still didn't fully trust her. She wondered what she had done wrong to be reborn into Owen Lilith's body. The Duke couldn't understand how his aloof wife could cry before him, clear amethyst tears slipping from her eyes. It was the first time he had seen her so vulnerable, making him more sensitive towards her. Mrs. Tilly approached the Duke, asking if he had given the dress to his wife. She also noted that he had not only given her the dress, but also spoken with her. He said they had chatted about everyday topics, like how beautiful the dress was. Afterwards, Mrs. Tilly asked the Duke if he truly hadn't noticed Owen's efforts. The Duke didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked what a woman's crying meant. She said women usually cry when they're heartbroken. Only then did she realize the Duke was asking because Owen had cried in front of him. But the Duke said she didn't need to know that and told her to hurry back to Owen so she could change in her dress. After Mrs. Tilly left, Fairwyne went to the door and listened to see if Owen had stopped crying. Once he was sure everything was all right, he said with relief that it was good she had stopped. But then he realized he was starting to worry about her. The Duke found this absurd, as he still remembered how she had treated him during their 4 years of marriage. After a long war between the Teresian Empire and the Wilma Duchy, the Imperial army finally reached the capital of the Wilma Duchy. It was there that Fairwyne first met his future wife, Owen. He had never loved anyone as much as he loved her, and it was the first time he had fought for someone's heart. It seemed their marriage was a decision made by the Emperor to resolve diplomatic issues, but in reality, it was all because Fairwyne learned that the Emperor's younger brother, Duke Sibling, intended to marry Owen. Even though she arrived in the Teresian Empire as the princess of a defeated nation and remained silent, Fairwyne still believed that as long as he was resolute enough, Owen would get used to life as a duchess. He was even certain she would be happy with him. But even though he did everything for her, it was all just a fantasy. The vicious words she said to him on their wedding night made him grind his teeth. Moreover, the phrase "I'd rather die than share a bed with you" made his heart stop. Despite years of effort, her hatred hadn't disappeared. The day everyone had to attend finally arrived, and the Duchess decided to showcase her singing voice to the servants. Everyone was looking forward to Owen's rehearsal. The maid, Marianne, said she heard that the most talented people were often extremely insecure, but the Duchess's talent would surprise everyone. Kate thanked everyone, but she remembered that before entering Owen's body, she had been a singer with a musical education. Just then, Mrs. Tilly suddenly entered the room and said that His Majesty had arrived, and he had brought the Empress and Duke Sybil, whose presence was completely unexpected. Owen knew she couldn't make any mistakes now, especially at this crucial moment, because the bar had been set so high precisely to make her scapegoat. If she made a mistake now, everyone would think her intention was to humiliate Fairwind. Moreover, today was Owen's first public appearance, and Kate had to prove with her actions that she was a good wife and absolutely worthy of her husband. After much contemplation about her upcoming debut, Owen decided to go out and meet the guests. As Owen was about to leave, Mrs. Tilly told her to wait because the Duke wanted to see her. The Duchess felt scared. Why did he want to see her? Didn't he hate her? As she left, Owen said that from today onwards, his opinion of her would change. As she left the room, she noticed a man's figure behind the door. The Duke had been standing there, listening to everything she had just said. He said the Duchess was being too hasty in her thinking. After the servants left, this frightened Owen, as she was afraid of being alone with her husband. After the servants left, Fairwind closed the door, leaving him alone in the room with his wife. But a terrified Owen said they should go. Fairwind reached out to touch the Duchess, but she pushed his hand away. The Duke immediately said that this was her true desire, that she wanted to hit him. Hearing this, the Duchess was frightened by the Duke's terrifying look. But the Duke said he was just trying to brush the hair away from her face. As he moved away, Fairwind joked that he was just trying to lighten the mood a little, though a woman like her wouldn't understand. The Duchess was surprised, as she couldn't understand how this cold man could laugh. She said that if that was his way of comforting her, she believed he would get used to her new self. Slightly embarrassed by this, the Duke said that if she performed poorly at the debut ceremony, everyone would laugh at him. They had to hurry and meet the guests, as everyone was waiting for Owen. They went to the ceremony together. As they descended the stairs, she asked her husband to slow down because the dress that day was very uncomfortable. While walking down the grand staircase, Owen stepped on the hem of her dress and began to fall. Panicked, Fairwind immediately reached out to help her, showing concern and support, but his efforts to catch the Duchess were unsuccessful. He couldn't reach her in time. Owen stumbled on the stairs, hitting her head and losing consciousness. The Manor's event was about to begin, yet Owen found herself in this absurd situation. All the guests had gathered in the ballroom. The surrounding guests were discussing how the manor hadn't changed since the previous Duke Carlisle's time. A servant of Carlisle dukedom approached the men who were looking around, informing them that the Duchess would be singing today. Then, one of the men noticed the servants assisting the Duchess with her preparations. Duke Sibling also attended the event because the Duchess was singing. He would never have appeared on an ordinary night, but the fact that his wife was performing changed everything. At that moment, the Duchess was sitting on the bed in her room, being examined by a doctor. The doctor told the Duke that her injuries were not serious, but standing on stage would certainly be difficult due to her injured ankle. Fairwind began to blame himself. If he hadn't walked so fast, none of this would have happened. Owen, unconcerned about her injuries, immediately headed to the festival venue. She felt ashamed for making the guests wait so long, especially since many important figures were present. But as she walked, she realized that her injury made movement very difficult. At the critical moment, her husband caught her in time, preventing her from falling again. The Duke insisted she follow the doctor's advice. It was just a song, and no one would care if she sang or not. But she could not come, because this song was only for Fairwind. The Duke couldn't believe his ears, so he asked again to confirm. Owen confirmed her feelings to her husband and told him to listen carefully to the song. Then, the Duke took his wife's hand and led her into the hall towards the guests. The news that Owen's song was for him made the Duke shy. He even asked others not to see this side of him because the real Owen belonged only to him. At this time, Duke Sibling was asking a servant when the Duchess would come down. In the half hour of the festival, Sibling had already drunk his 7th glass of champagne. The Emperor scolded Duke Sibling for drinking before the dinner had officially started and demanded he behave himself. Even the emperor himself noticed the duchess's changed attitude towards the cultural festival. Just then, the duchess and the duke descended the stairs together, and everyone was shocked by Owen's transformation. Because at the wedding, everyone could see their indifference to each other, like enemies after a war. No one understood why Fairwind looked at his wife that way. He gazed at her with loving eyes. The atmosphere was like a blooming garden, filled with a pleasant fragrance, but some of the plants were actually thorny. The duchess greeted the guests very kindly. The emperor expressed his concern, as he hadn't seen Owen at the palace or in their circles for a long time, and had heard she recently fainted. He inquired about her health with concern. Owen responded to the emperor gracefully and thanked him for his concern. Sibling rudely interrupted their conversation, adding that Owen would be a better wife for him than Vina. Owen realized she wasn't actually familiar with Sibling, as she hadn't encountered him in the book. She felt it best not to get too close to him. Then, she apologized for failing to fulfill her duties for 4 years. From now on, she would do her best to be a good duchess. She also promised a song as proof and asked everyone to wait patiently. She dedicated the song to Fairwind, took a deep breath, and prepared to perform the musical masterpiece with relish. When she began to sing, all the guests were astonished, as they hadn't expected Owen to be so talented. For a moment, Owen felt that the audience seemed to be enjoying her performance, and her leg didn't hurt at all. But midway through the performance, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her leg. To the surprise of the entire audience, Owen fell on stage, but she didn't stop. Instead, she continued her splendid performance. At this moment, Fairwind rushed forward to pick her up, but Owen stopped him and continued singing. Sitting on the floor, Owen could only think about how she couldn't stand up. Nevertheless, she mustered her courage and continued singing as if nothing had happened. The guests noticed that the girl's posture resembled a scene from an opera, as she was practically kneeling while singing. But the Duke couldn't hear anything, completely captivated by his wife singing. Everyone present murmured amongst themselves, convinced they had never heard a more enchanting song. As the Duchess finished, Sibling decided that a beautiful crimson rose would add an incredible fragrance to the performance. As Sibling moved towards the Duchess, Fairwind noticed and, bypassing those in front of him, reached her first. The Duke kissed her hand, thanking her for so bravely singing such a beautiful song for him. Sibling was displeased by the Duke's actions, but the Duke told his wife that from now on, she shouldn't sing about him in public, as he wanted to hear it himself, wanting her to be his duchess and his alone. He wanted her and her inner world to belong only to him. In the popular novel Fairwind and Stella, the main antagonist, Owen Lilith, makes a brief appearance at the beginning, prompting them to come together. Her role was simple and small, dying for the love of others. In the original work, the couple were bound only by their marriage contract, nothing more, and nowhere was it written that Fairwind had even the slightest affection for Owen. So why would he say such a thing? Kate couldn't understand why the Duke wanted her to sing the song for him privately, nor why he wanted that radiance to belong only to himself. After all, in the original work, he only acted this way towards the female protagonist and had no feelings for Owen. The Duchess then said she would gladly sing for her husband 1,000 times more. Following this, the Marchioness of Celestine called out to her, praising her singing. The Duchess was delighted by the Marchioness's praise. As Owen moved to approach the Marchioness, the Duke took her hand, saying he was afraid to let her go alone. She didn't understand what was happening, but the Duke said they must appear as a true couple in public. In response, Owen thanked the Marchioness, saying she was grateful for her attendance at the festival and apologized for not spending more time with her. When Fairwind saw that his wife's hair was a little disheveled, he decided to fix it. Owen began to worry, as she felt it was too late to present a harmonious marital image. Those standing around were deeply moved by the sight of Fairwind carefully arranging his wife's hair. Night quietly fell, and all the guests began to bid farewell to the Duchess, sincerely expressing their gratitude for the evening and her wonderful performance. The guests departed joyfully, and even the Empress shared her feelings, saying that Owen's singing had moved her to tears. The Emperor called Owen a true sinner for not having showcased such an elegant voice in public before. The Emperor and Empress immediately invited Owen and Fairwind to their ball, which delighted Owen, as it was an opportunity to present her best image as a wife in public. However, the Duke began to worry about the invitation, as Owen hadn't appeared in public for a long time and didn't know anyone in those circles. She might feel extremely awkward, so if she didn't want to go, he wouldn't force her. Sibling immediately appeared, offering to look after the Duchess. The Emperor expressed his displeasure at Sibling's behavior and demeanor, as he wasn't even her fiancé, yet showed such strange concern for another man's wife. Sibling ignored the Emperor and began incessantly questioning Owen. Sibling was very persistent, even attempting to touch the Duchess's face. Before the stranger could touch his wife, Irwyne immediately pushed his hand away. Sibling was furious, but Irwyne said he was merely swatting away a bothersome mosquito and asked for forgiveness, while pointing out that Sibling should apologize to Owen. Irwyne informed the Emperor that he would accompany his wife to the ball. The Emperor was very honored and looked forward to seeing the couple. After the remaining guests departed, the Duke and Duchess saw them off, left alone. Irwyne thanked his wife and praised her, calling her a good girl, but said he had to leave and prepared to depart. At that moment, Owen gently took his hand. Filled with curiosity, she first asked the Duke if he liked her song. But before he could answer, Owen asked him what he thought of her. She said she wanted to hear his true feelings. At that moment, Irwyne realized he had been thinking about Owen's loveliness and beauty. His long-constrained heart was finally free, wanting only to embrace her. But instead of speaking beautiful words, he said that she had yelled at him enough over the past 4 years, and her voice was so astounding that even the piano couldn't be heard. Having said this, Irwyne felt incredibly ashamed of his words. He couldn't believe he'd said such a thing, as his thoughts were of something entirely different and beautiful. After hearing the Duke's words, Irwyne became upset, saying she knew she had treated him poorly for the past 4 years. Irwyne decided to ask the Duchess if she truly meant what she had said earlier about wanting forgiveness. Irwyne confidently replied that she did. The Duke sighed heavily, seemingly covering his aching head with his hand, and said that people couldn't change that quickly. However, he frankly admitted that he had been waiting for the Duchess to change. Moved by his own emotions, the Duke confessed his love to the Duchess, explaining that he had patiently waited for 4 years for the moment he could say these words, but she had never been truly honest with him during those years. Yet even in this warm moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still pretending. She responded with a look of sorrow, expressing understanding, as Kate knew Owen couldn't change in an instant. As Owen was about to leave, she expressed her gratitude to the Duke for his company that evening. Irwyne couldn't understand why Owen was so kind to him in public, yet privately tore his heart to shreds. Unable to let her go, he chased after her and embraced her tightly, whispering in her ear his desire for her not to leave him. Kate couldn't understand what this man was thinking. He had been so cold to her, yet now he was holding her. Owen asked him to loosen his grip as he was holding her too tightly. She told the Duke that she wasn't trying to run away from him. In a sudden shift, Irwyne said he genuinely enjoyed her singing. The Duchess reminded him that he had previously called it merely a performance. Irwyne regretted his words, explaining that he had simply expressed himself poorly. After all, he had seen how much effort she had put into the performance, so he couldn't call it anything else. Owen said that it would be better if he showed his affection through actions rather than just words. He was kind to her in public, yet too cold in private. To prove his affection for his wife, Irwyne kissed her. After such a turbulent and unusual night, the Duchess returned to her room, lay in bed, and began to reflect on everything. She wondered if her actions had any meaning and what her husband's true feelings were. After all, she would die if she could never know what Irwyne was thinking. Just then, Mrs. Tilly entered the room to help her mistress change. The Duchess sincerely thanked Mrs. Tilly for her help. Mrs. Tilly decided to ask her about her husband's opinion of her wonderful performance. She was sure he must have praised her. Owen thought back to the evening again, sharing her husband's words about her performance not being an act. Mrs. Tilly comforted the Duchess, saying he surely didn't mean it that way. She added that the Duke was a very honest man, so sometimes his words sounded harsh, even though they weren't meant to be. The aide suggested Owen take a walk in the garden, as the night air would help her relax and clear her mind. Meanwhile, the Duke was sitting in his study, feeling like he was going mad. He was filled with regret for impulsively kissing Owen when they were alone, wishing he had remained silent. After all, his comment about Owen's singing had clearly been too harsh. He found his worry for Owen lingering, making it difficult to breathe, and decided to go to the window. Unexpectedly, through the window, he saw Owen sitting in the garden gazebo. She looked around, making sure no one was there, then took off her shoes and lay down comfortably. The Duke stood at the window, watching his wife, feeling like he was peeking, even though they were married. Owen clearly felt someone watching her and looked back to see someone in the window. She was interrupted by Mrs. Tilly, who said she had brought macarons and hot chocolate. At that moment, the Duke quickly ducked out of sight. Ashamed of his actions, the day finally came to an end. The next morning, Owen opened her eyes and realized she was still at the mansion. Mrs. Tilly woke her up, reminding her that from today onwards, she was to greet the Duke when he arrived at the palace. Mrs. Tilly had suggested this to her while they were having tea yesterday, but she seemed to have completely forgotten. Last night, she had said the Duke was actually much simpler than Owen thought, advising her to continue doing what she was currently doing, but Owen realized they had been married for 4 years, and soon he would drink poison wine, and she would be responsible for it. She also knew she would see Stella and Fairwind together. Before her demise, to avoid this situation, she needed to build a relationship with him quickly. Excitedly, she asked Mrs. Tilly for advice on how to get closer to him. She hadn't expected the Duchess to be so concerned about her relationship with her husband. But Mrs. Tilly, with a sly smile, said she knew a way to convince the Emperor of the Duchess's sincerity. In the morning, Mrs. Tilly helped the Duchess dress. Mrs. Tilly said she could now go to the Duke's room and help him choose his cufflinks. The aide said this would be a very precious and sincere gesture from the Duchess to her husband, Owen. Owen still didn't understand how this would affect their relationship. Mrs. Tilly explained that choosing his cufflinks was a gesture of affection and appreciation. It must have been difficult for him these past 4 years, and she needed to mend their relationship and make their marriage bloom again. Mrs. Tilly hinted to Owen that a more effective way to solidify their marriage would be to have an heir, but Owen was completely unprepared for this. Mrs. Tilly continued, saying that their 5th anniversary was approaching, and in the Fairwind family, it was customary to have an heir by this time. Utterly desperate, Owen realized that even if she couldn't build a relationship with him, she had to have a child so she wouldn't die. The Duchess went to Fairwind's room, where Alfred greeted her. He was surprised to find Owen outside her husband's room so early in the morning. Owen told Alfred that she was going into the room to help her husband choose his clothes. Alfred, surprised, said that Owen had never done such a thing, so he had to inform his grace of her visit. But Mrs. Tilly, quite angry, scolded him for daring to speak to the Duchess that way and told him to open the door immediately. As the Duchess entered the room, Alfred and Mrs. Tilly wished her good luck, understanding that she still didn't know what helping to choose cufflinks implied. Upon entering, she was quite surprised to find his room much more simply furnished than she had imagined. He had given her the master bedroom to avoid trouble, and she hadn't realized he didn't actually sleep there. So Kate didn't understand why Owen was so cruel to him, since he had been so kind as to do all this. Owen accidentally stepped on a stack of documents and quickly bent down to pick them up. As she was gathering the papers, Fairwind entered the room. He was surprised, as this was the first time she had entered his room. But when Owen turned around, he was only half dressed, having just come out of the bath. Owen was startled, thinking she was hallucinating. When she realized it wasn't a hallucination, she cried out. But Fairwind was only concerned that Owen had messed up his papers. Moving closer to her face, he told her she was invading his privacy, but the Duchess denied everything, saying she was just there to help him choose his cufflinks. Fairwind, shocked, asked if she knew what that meant. He then realized Mrs. Tilly hadn't told her anything. Owen, not understanding the implications, asked her husband to explain. Fairwind explained that typically husbands are more energetic in the morning, so they would exert themselves more while the wife chooses his cufflinks. It was actually an excuse for the wife to enter the husband's bedroom in the morning. Owen, thinking he was teasing her, decided to play along with this tradition. She gently placed her hand on his bare chest, not fully understanding what she was doing. It wasn't until later that she realized if she let go of his hand, she would lose everything. Fairwind, slightly apprehensive, said that if she was joking, it would be best to let go. The Duchess continued the game, telling him not to worry, as they were just husband and wife. Unaware that the Duke didn't understand her jest, he immediately threw her onto the bed. She opened her eyes to see him beside her. She screamed in fear, But the Duke, in a calm voice, asked why she was so afraid, as he was the very person she wanted to touch. At this moment, Fairwind placed the Duchess's hand on his chest. Afterwards, Owen yelled that she was only joking, while Fairwind said it was no longer a joke but a blatant provocation, and the Duke certainly had the courage to accept the challenge. The Duke was prepared to respond to any suggestion from his wife, but she cried out again, saying that all she wanted was for him to dry himself off after his bath. Both of them felt the awkwardness between them. He obeyed the Duchess, doing as she asked. By this time, Alfred was very worried, as it was already 7:30 a.m. and they hadn't come out yet. But Mrs. Tilly was very calm. Alfred said he couldn't wait any longer and decided to enter their room. Mrs. Tilly reacted quickly, grabbing the hem of his coat and stopping him. Alfred said it was taking him twice as long to get ready as usual, as he needed to make sure everything was perfect. Mrs. Tilly replied that he was being naive, as the Duke and Duchess were currently alone together. Alfred, not understanding the implication, began to ask Mrs. Tilly some inappropriate questions. After the Duke fulfilled his wife's request, the Duchess said she was exhausted and wanted to return to her room to rest. But the Duke took her hand and asked her to help him choose his clothes for the day. She asked him if this was related to some family tradition, saying she wouldn't comply if it was. The Duke replied that there was no such tradition, so Owen agreed and decided to simply pick the first outfit she saw. It turned out to be a white suit, but when she turned around, she saw a towel on the floor. She was startled, but quickly realized her husband wasn't naked, but was already wearing trousers. Fairwind thought Owen seemed to be expecting something, that this was what she wanted. Owen denied it and urged him to get dressed quickly. While dressing, the Duke asked Owen to find him a pair of cufflinks. Suddenly, she noticed a very cute, heart-shaped pair of cufflinks and immediately handed them to him. The Duke asked her why she chose those particular cufflinks. The Duchess said the only reason was that she hoped they could be closer, that they could stop arguing and start their married life anew. Although the Duke found it strange to hear such words from her, he was pleased. He said he had noticed her efforts recently and promised to make an effort himself. Hearing this, Owen's face lit up with joy, as if everything was going in the direction she hoped. Mrs. Tilly, standing outside the door, overheard the entire conversation between Owen and the Duke and was delighted that their relationship was improving. Just then, the Duke and Duchess unexpectedly emerged from the room together. Alfred and Mrs. Tilly immediately invited them to breakfast, and all the servants gathered, taking turns to greet Mr. Fairwind. In the breakfast room, before the meal, the Duke told Owen that they would dine together that evening, asking her to wait for him and prepare a late-night snack. The servants were delighted by this news, as it was the first time Owen and Fairwind would dine together since their wedding. The Duchess responded cheerfully, realizing that in everyone's eyes, they seemed like the perfect couple. But she inquired further about the late-night snack, as it implied they would be spending the night together. The Duke reached out and told her that of all the duties of a duchess, this one was the most important. Face to face, Fairwind decided to ask her why she seemed so apprehensive, since he was talking about consummation. Fairwind then quickly left, leaving Owen still in shock, without a chance to reply. The Duchess tried to call out to Fairwind, wanting to understand what he meant. Fairwind, already mounted on his horse, called out to the Duchess that they would discuss it later that evening. Since their wedding night, Fairwind and Owen had never shared a bed, and their first night hadn't gone smoothly, with the Duchess throwing a tantrum, leaving a scar on both of them. Kate knew that if the first wedding night was as described, Fairwind would likely be against consummation, but he had suddenly changed his mind. The servants, having seen and heard all of this, began to whisper amongst themselves, thinking that after so many years, consummation seemed impossible. Owen was still standing there, stunned, but Mrs. Tilly beside her was touched and happy, saying she knew the Duchess would succeed. The servants' calls echoed around them, urging everyone to get everything ready, including dinner and a rose-petal-filled bath. Tears welled up in Owen's eyes as she realized she had made a huge mistake. Mrs. Tilly tried to comfort Owen, saying that this was how it should be. Their conversation continued. Mrs. Tilly told the Duchess that once the child was born, the elders wouldn't blame Owen anymore, and there would be no pressure. Just then, Mrs. Tilly blurted out something that displeased Owen, saying it was like a second marriage, and then immediately apologized. This clearly upset the Duchess, who angrily retorted that Mrs. Tilly was being insensitive. Owen didn't care if it was a new marriage or not. Her only goal was to successfully complete this wedding. To reconcile the two, Owen immediately tried to ease the tension, telling Mrs. Tilly that Fairwind probably only mentioned consummation out of politeness. But Mrs. Tilly insisted that the Duke would never say such a thing lightly. She also whispered a reminder in Owen's ear about his promise, never to touch her without permission. At that moment, Owen recalled Fairwind's last gentle touches, but she couldn't understand why he suddenly mentioned consummation. She questioned Mrs. Tilly about it. Mrs. Tilly said that Owen had become so beautiful recently that no gentleman could remain indifferent. Owen was surprised by her answer, as in her mind, things should have been completely different. The scene shifts to the Treja Imperial Palace. Fairwind was already working at the palace, but his thoughts kept returning to the conversation with Owen about reconciliation. The Duke understood her meaning and tried to steer the conversation in a peaceful direction. However, every time they started to build a good rapport, the pressure on Owen to produce an heir increased. He felt that even the astute Mrs. Tilly was unusually fixated on the matter of an heir, perhaps to protect Owen from the interference of their elders. Then, Count Lance Celestine of the Celestine family entered the room and asked Fairwind why he was frowning. The Count noticed that the Duke hadn't even realized he'd entered, as the servants outside kept knocking to deliver letters. Lance immediately noticed the Duke's cufflinks and was very surprised, as the Duke himself would never choose that style. Fairwind told the Count that Owen had chosen them for him, but Lance could hardly believe it. Shocked, the Duke was displeased with Lance's reaction, pointing out that it was perfectly normal for a wife to help choose things. Lance immediately apologized for his rudeness. Looking at the letters he received, Fairwind said that an urgent decision had to be made today, as His Majesty's message could not be delayed any longer. As he was leaving, Lance joked that the Empire couldn't survive without the Duke. He wished him good luck, but the Duke suddenly turned serious and asked Lance what he liked about his own wife. Lance was momentarily speechless, only managing to say that he liked her beauty and charm. The Count then added that he loved her beauty and kind heart. But the Duke wasn't convinced, as Lance had talked about his ideal type before his marriage. The Count became quite annoyed and asked the Duke in return what he liked about his wife and why he got married so quickly, as if someone were chasing him. Fairwind immediately replied that Owen was his first love, and he was certain she would be the last love of his life. He had known and felt this from the very beginning. Lance was stunned, completely unexpected that the Duke was so deeply in love. He then remembered that Fairwind was supposed to attend a royal event with his wife next week. The Duke replied that yes, he had personally promised the Emperor. The Duke was somewhat surprised that the Count already knew about their attendance. He lowered his head to write on the paper, and Lance mentioned that Miss Bell would also be present. The Duke immediately looked up, surprised, and questioned Lance about Bell. Miss Stella Bell had been one of the candidates for the Duchess. Fairwind Carlyle's thoughts instantly went back to his childhood. With his mother dying in childbirth and his father showing no affection, Fairwind spent his childhood alone in a country manor. The only memories from that time were of Mrs. Tilly, his nanny, and Miss Stella Bell, who lived in a neighboring manor. Fairwind decided to ask Lance if he knew it was impolite to mention another woman's name in front of a married man, and why he specifically pointed out that she was a candidate for Duchess. Lance, upon hearing the Duke's words, Lance realized his foolishness and quickly apologized for what he had said. He had simply always considered himself and Miss Bell childhood friends. Fairwind then said that if Lance had nothing else to say, he had to go see His Majesty. Lance was certain the Emperor was probably spending time with the Empress, at which point the Duke smiled slightly and said he, too, wanted to spend quality time with his wife. As the Duke left, the Count was shocked by Fairwind's words about wanting to get along with his wife, whether in casual or intimate conversation. Lance had originally thought Owen would change, but now he began to suspect that perhaps it was Fairwind who had changed. Meanwhile, in Owen's room, Mrs. Tilly was speaking sternly, saying that the Duchess absolutely must make eye contact with the Duke. At one point, all the maids surrounded Owen, simply sighing over the passing of time and the beautiful weather. To Owen's surprise, one maid approached Mrs. Tilly, mentioning she'd brought the musk, but Owen exclaimed that their discussion of musk made the whole thing seem suspicious. Mrs. Tilly tried to reassure Owen, saying she needn't worry at all, as musk was highly prized in their circles. The maid holding the packet of musk on a tray wore a rather peculiar expression. Owen felt uneasy about the strange situation. Mrs. Tilly attempted to place the musk packet inside Owen's petticoat, but Owen firmly refused to use such a suspicious item. However, Mrs. Tilly was persistent, quickly tucking the packet where she intended. Owen cried out, demanding Mrs. Tilly remove the item immediately, but Mrs. Tilly insisted that removing it would ruin the dress. Mrs. Tilly wanted Marianne to fetch some rose oil, but found her assistant wasn't where she called her. Turning around, both Mrs. Tilly and Owen were stunned by the sight before them. Marianne was underneath Owen's skirts. She couldn't understand how Marianne could be so quickly intoxicated by the scent, but Marianne claimed the musk's fragrance was so beautiful she couldn't even feel her fingertips. The maids began to scold their assistant, saying such things shouldn't be said in front of the Duchess, but Owen reassured them that everything was all right. Marianne said all the maids were constantly talking about the Duchess's beauty and loveliness. In a daze, Marianne asked Owen why she rarely attended gatherings at other noble houses. Owen, slightly embarrassed, replied that she would be attending a ball at the Imperial Palace next week. At that moment, Mrs. Tilly realized it was time to present the dresses, preferably several, as she needed to decide which one Owen would wear to the event. Just then, Alfred knocked, announcing a letter from the Baron. The letter, handed to Owen, stated that the Duke was working late on the Emperor's orders and that she needn't wait for him and could retire for the night. All the servants were shocked, as they had meticulously prepared for the evening. Owen thought that perhaps Fairwind himself didn't desire the intimacy, so she could change out of the dress. The maids were extremely disappointed with this outcome. All their hard work on Owen's makeup and hair had been for nothing. Owen declared that since her maids had made her so beautiful, she would wear the dress to dinner, pleasing them greatly. She realized that this gesture had won the maids' hearts and dispelled any negative image. Now she could take a walk in the garden. Mrs. Tilly offered to accompany her, but Owen said she wanted to be alone for a while. Marianne was angry with the Emperor, saying they had waited for so many months, so many years, and he had ruined everything. Mrs. Tilly defended the Duke, saying he surely knew nothing about it, but Marianne remained adamant. Because the Baron was a distant relative of the royal family, and the Empress had only daughters, the current true heir was Duke Sibyl, since he was unmarried. The maid remarked that if Owen had a son, he would have a chance to inherit the throne. Mrs. Tilly became extremely angry, stating that the Baron was fiercely loyal to the royal family. She was thankful no other servants were present, and insisted such talk must never be repeated. As Mrs. Tilly was about to leave the room, Alfred stopped her, informing her of another letter from the Baron. Prior to this, the Duke had personally gone to see the Emperor. Fairwind requested to leave work early, as his family's well-being depended on it. The Duke promised to arrive early the next day and take care of everything. The Emperor readily agreed, urging him to hurry home as the matter was urgent. In truth, the Emperor simply wanted to dine with the Duke because they had a new chef. This was the so-called urgent matter, which displeased the Duke. The Emperor also wanted the Duke to bring a piece of pie back for his wife, but the Baron refused due to the pressing time. After the Duke left, the Emperor's wife arrived, and they discussed how much the Duke had changed recently, as he was so eager to see the Duchess. Upon learning that Owen would be returning tonight, all the servants searched the entire estate for her. Just then, Fairwind returned and asked what was happening. Mrs. Tilly explained the situation. They had received news of the Duke's imminent arrival and went to inform Owen, but she was nowhere to be found, leaving Fairwind utterly shocked. A few hours earlier, at the mansion, Owen strolled through the garden, thinking how fortunate it was that the Duke was returning home late. Although he was her husband in name, she wasn't ready to share a bed with a man she barely knew. Even if he was handsome and charming, she absolutely couldn't do it. Besides, she probably wasn't attractive to the Duke in that way anyway. His suggestion to sleep together tonight was probably just for the servants to see them as a married couple. After all, her goal was simply to fulfill her duties as a contractual wife and then separate peacefully. After careful consideration, she decided to return. But in the distance, she saw a small cottage in the garden. She entered the cottage, but found no one there. She noticed the cottage was too clean to be abandoned and guessed it might be the gardener's residence. As she was about to leave, she noticed a cute little black cat under the table. Owen couldn't just leave it, so she approached and asked if it was lost and couldn't find its mother. She also realized that if she left it there, it might starve, but if she took it away, it would never see its mother again. She decided to stay with it and wait for its mother to return. There was still plenty of time before dinner. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Tilly had already started looking for the Duchess to inform her of a letter from Fairwin. Mrs. Tilly saw the cottage door ajar and went inside, finding the Duchess asleep on the floor. She wanted to wake her, but then thought it was a rare opportunity. Mrs. Tilly went to see the Duke, told him everything, and said she had searched all around the house, but couldn't find the Duchess. But she said she hadn't checked his cottage, the place where he and the Duchess could be alone. Mrs. Tilly added that the Duchess was probably embarrassed that the servants knew about their wedding night, so she thought she could spend the night with him in a more relaxed atmosphere. Since none of the other servants knew where Owen was, Mrs. Tilly let the Duke go find her himself. When the Duke entered the cottage, he saw his wife sleeping on the floor. He wondered why she was sleeping on the floor instead of the bed. He looked at her, thinking she looked particularly lovely while asleep, full of gentleness and beauty. Fairwin couldn't resist and decided to pick her up. The Duchess woke up at his touch. She didn't understand how she could have fallen asleep so soundly. Owen opened her eyes and was startled to see Fairwin standing beside her. The Duke said it was his own cottage, a place he came to when he wanted to be alone. Owen gestured for her to come inside. The Duchess then realized that she had wandered into the cottage while walking in the garden and fallen asleep. The Duke was still wearing the same clothes from the morning, indicating he hadn't worked late but had come straight home. The Duchess said she didn't want to go back to the house. She knew that if she returned to the house, she would have to share a bed with the Duke. After she refused, a clear look of disappointment crossed the Duke's face. He said that couples in good relationships should sleep in the same bed. Owen realized he was right and asked her husband to agree that they could share a room but sleep in separate beds. The Duke said that she was the one who said they should start over and be a loving couple. But in the Duchess's view, they were only a loving couple in front of others, which didn't mean they had to share a bed now, and he didn't want children anyway. The Duke murmured that he never said he didn't want children. The Duchess didn't hear him clearly and asked him to speak up. Just then, the scent of musk began to take effect. The Duke collapsed, not understanding what the smell was. Fairwin, completely unaware of what was happening, asked the Duchess what she had done to him. Fairwin immediately jumped up and tightly embraced the Duchess. Owen had completely forgotten about the small pouch Mrs. Tilly had given her and didn't understand what was happening. She abruptly pushed the Duke away. As soon as Owen pushed him away, he immediately understood what the scent was, his eyes filled with questioning. He immediately knelt down, reaching under the Duchess's skirt, and pulled out the small pouch. Owen became even angrier at the Duke's actions, but then Fairwin said it was musk from the rare white deer of the north. The item under Owen's skirt was very strange. The Duchess angrily exclaimed that she had no idea what it was, that it must have fallen out of Mrs. Tilly's things when she was packing. Fairwin, confident in himself, felt that the Duchess must be feigning ignorance and was well aware of why this was happening. But he said that girls have been using these musk pouches to entice men for over 100 years, and she had fulfilled all the conditions for seduction: meticulous makeup, a beautiful dress, and finally, the alluring scent as the finishing touch. She approached Owen, looked directly into his deep eyes, and said that this whole image and scent were the fault of the servants who had orchestrated it, and she had only agreed to go along with it for the evening. Hearing this, the Duke decided that if she had dressed up for the maid's wishes, she should also fulfill his. He leaned in close to her lips and whispered that since she had fulfilled the maid's wishes, she must also fulfill her husband's. Was he less important than the maid's? At this moment, all Owen could think was that if she had known it would turn out like this, she would have ripped that damned sachet out of her dress long ago. But then again, how could she have known that the Duke would come home early? He had neither informed her beforehand nor sent a maid to fetch her. Fairwin, without hesitation, scooped his wife into his arms. As always, Owen tried to stop him, but the gentleman persisted, placing her on the bed. Already lying there, Owen, true to her nature, demanded that her husband stay away from her. She wanted nothing from him. She had no interest in whatever he had planned. Fairwin, still persistent, gently touched her, saying he wouldn't leave her side. Owen angrily shouted that they would be looking for her in the mansion, but Fairwin tried to explain that they were spending time together, and there was no need for anyone to look for her. Owen, completely unable to control her negative emotions, told her husband that he looked more like a beast trying to possess her, leaving the Duke both shocked and furious. How dare she? To justify herself, Owen explained that forcing her onto the bed was indeed beastly behavior. This attitude only enraged him further, and he immediately tore open his shirt. Clearly, this action only heightened his excitement. He stood before her, his strong torso bare, while her gaze remained remarkably cold. The Duke leaned down close to her face and reminded her that on their first night, she had spoken of revenge, though he felt she had already achieved it. Owen was bewildered, having no idea what he was talking about. The Duke told her that his constant pursuit of her, driven by an insatiable desire, was the ultimate revenge. Looking directly into his sharp gaze, Owen couldn't believe that Fairwind himself was admitting to constantly pursuing her. After all, he had never shown any affection or tenderness. In the original story, there was no bond of love between Owen and the Duke. But Owen said she had no interest in revenge and only wanted a peaceful life. Just then, thunder rumbled outside and heavy rain began to pour. They certainly couldn't leave now. Owen ended up missing dinner, and her stomach was rumbling. The Duke heard her stomach growl too. Fairwind suggested they eat together and then continue their conversation. She once again displayed her stubbornness and individuality. She insisted on continuing their talk, but the intense hunger pangs finally won over Owen, and they began to eat whatever food they could find in the cottage. Searching around the cottage for something better for his wife to eat, the Duke discovered a bottle of wine. Clearly pleased, he invited Owen to try the strawberry wine. He filled her glass, and surprisingly, this time she didn't refuse, beginning to savor the strawberry wine Fairwind had found. He gazed at his wife for a long moment, his gaze both sharp and tender as she savored the drink. Noticing breadcrumbs on his wife's face, Fairwind began to brush them away. But Owen, preoccupied, was clearly annoyed by this attentiveness. Owen decided to remind Fairwind that although they were staying in the same room, they would sleep in separate beds. After all married couples slept in the same bed, and if the maids came in the morning and saw them, they would tell the elders. But Owen seemed to be touched by her husband's consideration. He told her he wouldn't force her to do anything, but Owen retorted that she could easily have children with someone else who truly loved her. Owen's words infuriated Fairwind, and he immediately stood up and declared loudly that he would do just that. Owen didn't understand why he was staring at her like that, but she knew one thing. The reason for his anger wasn't the topic of children, but the mention of another partner. Hours passed, and the Duke started a fire in the hearth. The cottage gradually grew quiet, and Owen, calmed, sat reading. She realized the rain wouldn't stop anytime soon, and they would have to spend the night in the cottage. She looked around and saw a small bed, clearly meant for two, with Fairwind already lying on it. She mustered her courage and approached him, asking if he really intended to sleep in this bed. The Duke seemed perplexed by the question. He felt they had already agreed to share the bed, as there was no other option. Owen proudly turned her back, indicating her intention to sleep on the floor. Without waiting for a reply, Fairwind gently took her hand and whispered that she should stay and sleep with him. He tried his best to show genuine care and concern for his wife, attempting to dissuade her by saying she might get sick if she slept on the floor. While the Duchess was still trying to process what he'd said, Fairwind had already pulled her towards him. He then gently covered her with a blanket, not wanting her to catch a chill. Owen tried to throw off the blanket, but a sudden chill made her realize she had no choice but to stay in the warm bed with him. Overcoming her pride, she lay down beside him, the thought of sharing a bed with him lingering in her mind. After all, in her past life, she had never shared a bed with a man. Having wrestled with her thoughts, the Duchess eventually fell asleep next to Fairwind. She looked exceptionally gentle in her sleep. The Duke gazed at her, a strong desire to be tender towards her welling up within him. Yet, every time she tried to push him away, he couldn't restrain his roughness for long. He held her as close as he could, whispering that he longed to know her true feelings, yet feared the truth. He wondered if he could still love her as he had before, worried that she would reject his love. The Duchess began to toss and turn her asleep. In her unconscious restlessness, she turned towards the Duke and embraced him. He returned the embrace. Her lips brushed against his bare chest. He still couldn't understand how she could fall asleep with him. This cottage was his sanctuary, a place where he had sought refuge from her indifference, and now they were here together. The fire made the cottage increasingly warmer. The Duke felt increasingly hot and began to remove his shirt. When he was undressed, he noticed that Owen was completely uncovered. At that moment, she looked so vulnerable, trying to warm herself with her own hands. The Duke, unable to contain his feelings any longer, kissed the sleeping Duchess. He knew he shouldn't have done it, as she hadn't consented. He fought back his emotions, even scratching his own hand to restrain himself. Having calmed himself, he turned and embraced her, surprised by her warmth. He had always thought of her as cold as ice. Come to think of it, this was the first time they had embraced like this. At their modern wedding, she had been so cruel, but at least then he knew what she was thinking and feeling. But ever since the day she fainted, he could no longer understand her. He was glad she was starting to be kinder to him, but he still longed to hear something else from her, something very important, words he himself had never uttered. The Duke decided he would be the first to confess his enduring love for her. It seemed strange to speak of love to someone sleeping, but these words finally brought him peace, and he drifted off to sleep, holding his still enigmatic wife. A warm morning arrived, bathing the entire palace in sunlight. This day was destined to be filled with heartwarming moments. Kate woke with the first rays of sun, slowly opening her eyes. She sat up, yawned, and remarked to Fairwind that the rain seemed to have stopped. Rubbing her eyes, she opened them fully to see not Fairwind, but Mrs. Tilly standing there. The protagonist was startled, wondering how she could be here. Mrs. Tilly curtsied and asked if she was awake. But as Owen finally became fully conscious, she began to understand where she was. She looked around and wondered why she was here, as she had clearly fallen asleep in the cottage. Mrs. Tilly explained that her husband had carried her back from the cottage at dawn. She added that he had been incredibly careful, as if carrying the most fragile treasure in the world. The protagonist could hardly believe it. Had Fairwind really carried her back himself? Mrs. Tilly then happily informed her that her husband had also said he would sleep here every reunion day from now on, and that on future reunion nights, she would do everything in her power to ensure the Duchess's comfort. She added that the elders were also delighted for them. The girl angrily clutched the sheets. Was this what they called reunion? She suddenly remembered her promise to Fairwind to observe the reunion decreed by the elders. But she was also annoyed that she had only meant to defuse the situation at the time, and he had already told Mrs. Tilly all of this, and Mrs. Tilly had actually believed it all. Just one night in the same room, Owen said bitterly. Mrs. Tilly smiled at her, urging her not to worry, and looked at her with a puzzled expression. The headmaid blushed slightly and asked if Owen truly believed Fairwind would abandon her. As soon as he finished with his official duties, he would visit her more and more often. After Mrs. Tilly finished speaking, Owen looked at her gloomily, thinking about how Mrs. Tilly, who usually understood her so well, had changed. Then she began to console herself. After all, he had promised never to touch her without permission. Come to think of it, he made that promise to fulfill his marital obligations. Suddenly, Mrs. Tilly interrupted her thoughts, asking how she had slept last night. She must have thought the sachet was very effective. There were only 3 such sachets in the entire empire, a gift from the elders themselves. Even couples on the verge of divorce could reconcile because of them, she continued. But Owen was not happy at all, glaring at the headmaid, wishing they knew how much she had suffered because of that sachet. Fairwind probably thought she was seducing him. Owen told Mrs. Tilly that she would not use it again. It was too much trouble. Holding her head, she said, how could she think that he would be satisfied with just a sachet? But Owen began to argue, saying that wasn't entirely true. Just then, Marian burst in, shouting, Mrs. Tilly. Mrs. Tilly. Mrs. Tilly immediately shouted at Marianne, hadn't she told her to knock before entering Owen's room. The maid quickly apologized. How could you just barge in like that? The head maid asked her. Marianne, panting, said that Fairwind had instructed them to go for a dress fitting with Owen after 2 o'clock today. Both Owen and Mrs. Tilly's mouths dropped open in surprise. Owen asked again about the dress fitting. The head maid turned to Owen and said it was probably to choose a dress for next week's celebration. Owen said it was the first time she had heard of it. Marianne immediately handed the letter to Owen, who opened it and read that she should be ready at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to go to Madame Bertrand's dress shop together. Mrs. Tilly and Marianne were both shocked after hearing this. Owen tried hard to recall who Madame Bertrand was, as she was definitely in the novel. Finally, they decided to tell Owen who Madame Bertrand was, saying she was a rather capricious woman who only dealt with royalty. She had made dresses for the Empress many times, so Fairwind wanted her to make a dress for Owen as well, Mrs. Tilly said. Owen blushed slightly, feeling that such a gesture was too extravagant right after their discussion about marital obligations. Suddenly, Marianne turned to Owen, saying she wanted to ask a question. Marian blushed slightly and, gathering her courage, asked Owen if they had quarreled last night. Mrs. Tilly immediately interrupted her, sharply calling her name. The head maid went to Marianne and twisted her ear, making Marianne scream in pain. Mrs. Tilly apologized to Owen, promising to discipline the maid properly. Owen said it was all right, there was no need to hit her like that, and then asked the maid why she asked about last night. Marianne said there were bloodstains on the sheets and in more than one place. Owen was terrified and began to wonder where the blood came from. Had something really happened? But she had slept soundly last night. Mrs. Tilly started whispering to Marianne to use her brain and keep her mouth shut, but the maid was still restless. So the head maid decided to cover her mouth with her hand, smiling at Owen and saying it wasn't blood, it was wine stains. We drank wine last night. It's quite normal. She continued, saying that she always washed the sheets herself, so she could accurately distinguish between blood and wine stains. Owen breathed a sigh of relief, saying thank goodness. Mrs. Tilly began to recall bandaging Fairwind's hand that morning. She hadn't realized he had scratched his hand, trying to restrain himself. It seemed childhood habits didn't disappear after all these years. Thinking about it, he must have been quite embarrassed. The head maid continued to cover Marianne's mouth as she thought. Fairwind arrived at the Imperial Palace in the morning and went straight to where the Emperor was. One of the advisors came up to him and asked if everything went well, but he didn't answer. The advisor added that it was unbelievable that a punctual man like him was a whole hour late. Fairwind still didn't answer, just walked straight towards the Emperor. The advisor asked him if he was feeling unwell or if something had happened at home. Finally, the Duke turned to him, smiling, and said that if anything had indeed happened, it certainly wasn't anything bad. He added that he'd heard his relationship with his wife had improved, and it seemed to be true. He further remarked that everyone present at the celebration had highly praised his wife. Whether it was her appearance, her singing, or her demeanor, she was perfect. When will we see the Duchess again? A guard inquired as two more approached. Fairwind replied that there would be a celebration at the Imperial Palace next week. An advisor asked if they could now expect news of an heir, as they were both healthy and a child was only a matter of time. Other advisors were somewhat shocked by such an indiscreet question. He added that he would ask his wife to send them some herbs that aided in conception, but Fairwind was displeased by this. He snapped at the advisor, saying it was their private matter. Furthermore, he added, I will not tolerate you putting Owen in an awkward position. Then the advisor said it was time to see the Emperor and departed. The Emperor, upon seeing him, remarked that he was increasingly late, having kept him waiting a full hour. Fairwind retorted, hadn't he asked him not to visit impromptu, and that every meeting with him was difficult to prepare for in advance. His Majesty chuckled and told him that, for him, he could always make time. Fairwind stood his ground. They entered a large hall with an arena where many people had gathered. Someone commented on how handsome they both still were and requested another spectacular match. The Emperor and the Duke of Carlisle began to remove their outer garments. Fairwind undid his tie, looking pensive. The Emperor asked if he was ready to spar, and if so, why he hadn't removed his clothes. His Majesty, now shirtless, said, take it off. Let's test our mettle in combat. The Duke replied that, in this instance, the match itself was paramount. The Emperor, with a cryptic smile, said that they had known each other for many years, which made this somewhat awkward. Or are you shy? He asked him. Fairwind abruptly tore off his shirt, grasped his sword, and declared that his body was his greatest pride. The Duke of Carlisle assumed his fencing stance. The Emperor noticed his hand, questioning the bandage. Why are you just standing there? Are you uncomfortable seeing a naked body? The Duke asked. No, His Majesty replied. He was merely comparing their physiques. Who do you think is better? The Emperor asked Fairwind. Then he too picked up his sword and took his stance. The fight began. They clashed, the Duke parrying his attack. His Majesty, also skilled with the blade, deflected his advance. Suddenly, the Emperor asked him how last night was. Fairwind, not understanding, asked him what he meant. The Emperor, smiling, said he was simply concerned for him. Then His Majesty asked the Duke about the scar on his hand. It seems a certain lady left her mark, the Emperor said mockingly. The Duke, enraged, lunged forward, knocking the Emperor's sword to the ground. Fairwind barked at him to concentrate on the match, lest he be disrespectful. The Emperor retrieved his sword, and they continued to fight, blades meeting, both pressing with all their might, bodies close. In that moment, they were face to face. The emperor told him everything was all right, then whispered in his ear, in matters of the heart, girls will, at least occasionally, leave marks of passion on their boyfriends, so don't worry too much about that scar, although it looks quite painful. It's not what you think, Fairwind shouted, shoving the emperor back with his sword. His Majesty asked him, had he cut his hand himself then? If not, then he should tell the truth. Fairwind trembled with rage. The Duke did not tell him it was self-inflicted to control himself in front of Owen. Then, with all his might, he struck the emperor's sword. The emperor laughed. Come now, calm down. He then added, you weren't thinking about being quiet last night. Fairwind, furious, roared. With a powerful blow, he sent the emperor's sword flying. His Majesty fell to the ground, staring at his fallen weapon. The Duke stepped forward, pointing his sword at the emperor's face. The Duke stood there, gazing into his Majesty's eyes. Fairwind watched him silently, his sword unwavering. The onlookers held their breath, watching to see what the Duke would do next. Seconds later, the Duke lowered his sword, approached the emperor, leaned close to his face, and whispered in his ear that matters between husband and wife were not for outsiders to meddle in, and he had no idea what truly transpired. The emperor stood up and said it seemed there really wasn't a problem between him and his wife. Fairwind told him he lost, so why was he still smiling? He replied that it wasn't the first time he'd lost to him. He added that the Duke always said one should flaunt their body and appearance, not pretty words. So, how do you think it went? The emperor asked him, and the Duke of Carlisle fell into thought. He began to recall the night he spent with Owen. His Majesty suddenly said that he didn't think she was particularly interested in Fairwind's body. Then he asked him if she was picking out a dress for the ball today. Fairwind replied, yes, Your Majesty, but he didn't quite understand what the emperor was getting at. The emperor told him to hurry up. If she didn't like his body, perhaps he could find a way to remedy it, and ordered him to go and get ready. The Duke of Carlisle thanked his Majesty and ran off. As he ran, Fairwind thought on Auda. Perhaps he really wasn't her type. Then he stopped and said, but what can I do? What is Owen like? Good heavens, what should I do? For years ago, Madame Bertin became a phenomenon in the Imperial fashion world. All the ladies of the Empire longed to try on her dresses, and everyone envied her taste and prestige. But one of her dresses cost as much as a manor, and not every nobleman could use it to spoil their woman. Although she started from nothing, even having reached such a status, she wouldn't let just any rich person wear her dresses. Madame Bertin was known for her extravagance and confidence. Oh my, she's coming. She's really coming to see me, Madame Bertin exclaimed joyfully. She ordered her maids to clean everything and make sure it was spotless. Even a speck of dust landing on such a beautiful lady was unacceptable. The maid asked, puzzled, who she was waiting for. The mistress lost her patience and snapped at her, saying they were preparing for a distinguished guest whose name she didn't even know. The maid said fearfully that the mistress hadn't said who it would be. Madame Bertin said, it's the person who brought me to where I am today, my inspiration. My muse, Evan Lilith. After she finished speaking, the Duke and Duchess's carriage sped towards Madame Bertin's residence. Owen sat with her eyes closed and suddenly heard Fairwind complaining about how much his body ached. She became curious about what he had been doing at the palace to be in constant pain. And why was he sitting next to her instead of across from her? She wondered, looking out the carriage window, amazed by the scenery along the way. They were passing over a bridge with a beautiful river flowing beneath and many mansions nearby. Owen thought that, from this perspective, it was the first time in her life she had left the manor. Fairwind looked at her and asked if she enjoyed going out. She replied, of course, the weather is so nice. Why not go for a walk? The Duke grinned and said, how could someone who enjoys walks stay inside the manor for the past 4 years? The girl didn't react outwardly, her gaze suddenly falling on Fairwind's hand. She noticed bloodstains on his hand beneath his shirt and asked if he was injured. The Duke replied that it was nothing. Owen moved closer, asking him to show her the wound, as it seemed quite serious. But Fairwind waved her off, telling her not to worry. Owen insisted that if he was seriously injured, he could go home and rest, and she could go try on the dresses herself. But he refused, saying that he would keep his promise. Suddenly, the carriage went over a rough patch of road, jolting violently. Everything happened so fast that Owen didn't have time to react. She almost fell completely into Fairwind's arms, and he caught her around the waist just in time. Because of his sudden movement, the wound became more painful and blood seeped out. Fairwind didn't cry out in pain, only groaning softly. Owen stood up and began to apologize to the Duke, then touched his hand, worriedly saying that she should have a look at it. She was very concerned about the Duke, and seemed to be starting to understand what these injuries were about. Owen gently pulled back his hand, determined to see the wound beneath his shirt sleeve. She saw the nail marks and couldn't help but wonder how they got there. Could it really have been from last night? How did you get these scratches? Did a cat do it? Owen asked Fairwind. The Duke didn't understand what she meant by a cat. She said there was a cat at the villa, and perhaps it had scratched him. Fairwind, not knowing how to respond, simply said, "Yes, it must have been the cat." Owen exclaimed in surprise that such a cat could defeat a tiger like that. Yet Fairwind showed no reaction, merely saying he hadn't expected it. She took his hand, asking if he'd treated the wound, and wondering if the cat carried any diseases. Then, gazing into his eyes, she asked if he truly didn't want to go back. She could visit the salon alone. Fairwind snapped, saying everything was fine, and why did she always want to leave him by himself? Owen told him she was worried about him, which surprised the Duke. She thought to herself that he should at least stay healthy until the divorce and remarriage. So naturally, she was somewhat concerned. "You know, it's all because of you," Fairwind suddenly declared. Owen's mouth dropped open in astonishment. She asked him if she had done something wrong, perhaps in a dream. He coughed, saying he couldn't tell her. Owen persistently questioned him, then undid his tie and shirt buttons, beginning to caress his bare chest. But the Duke pulled her hand away. She asked what he was doing. They were husband and wife, so why was he so afraid to touch her? He told her it was all because of her. Owen couldn't understand what he meant. Fairwind asked why his heart was pounding so hard, and if she only knew how much he had suffered for her lately. But just then, a servant abruptly opened the carriage door, informing the Duke and Duchess that they had arrived at Madame Bertin's salon. Owen apologized, saying they would be there shortly. They arrived at a luxurious and fashionable mansion. As they entered the main hall, they saw everything glittering, with numerous gowns on display. Owen, gazing at them, exclaimed, "Wow, this place." The hostess herself greeted them, curtsying to the Duke and Duchess of Carlisle. Introducing herself as Isabella Bertin, but better known as Madame Bertin, she expressed her great honor in receiving them. Owen replied that it was a pleasure to meet her, and complimented the beautiful gowns, asking if she could choose one. But Madame Bertin abruptly said no, those dresses were absolutely not suitable for her. She explained that since ancient times, clothes were meant to complement the wearer's beauty, and a dress should not outshine the person, but only enhance her beauty. Madame Bertin approached Owen, taking her hand, and said that while those dresses were indeed beautiful, they were clearly not made for her beauty. "So which dress could she choose?" Owen asked. Madame Bertin replied that she needn't worry. She would do everything possible to make her shine at the ball. "Follow me," Madame Bertin said. As they walked, she confided that there was, in fact, a dress specially prepared for her. She led Owen to a display case containing a magnificent red gown. Behind the glass was the Emperor's residence. The day of the ball arrived, and Owen knocked on Fairwind's door. He told her not to just stand there, but to come in. When the Duke saw her in Madame Bertin's gown, he asked if she could cover up a bit more. Owen retorted, asking when he had started caring about such things, when he had started caring about what she wore. He replied, "Where would one find a husband who didn't care about his wife's attire?" They walked down the hall hand in hand, the gentleman leading her. They were greeted in the hall and addressed as Lady Carlisle. Owen was breathtaking, radiating confidence. Someone stood there, marveling, "My goodness, how can someone be so beautiful?" As they descended the stairs, whispers and murmurs about her rippled through the ballroom. One gentleman remarked that it seemed the rumors were true. She was indeed as beautiful as legend had it. Another said she had become even more beautiful since the wedding. The Emperor and Empress were waiting downstairs. Fairwind bowed to His Majesty. The Emperor remarked that he never thought he would come here with his wife. He then added that this wasn't Lady Carlisle's first appearance at such a ball. Fairwind sighed, saying it was merely His Majesty's wish. Owen introduced herself to the Empress. Her Majesty expressed her delight at her presence, having worried that the Duchess wouldn't come. "How could I dare disobey your command?" Owen, as Kate replied, but the Empress suddenly looked at her strangely. Then she asked if her dress was made by Madame Bertin. Owen hesitated slightly, then answered yes. Her Majesty said that she had been begging Madame Bertin to make her a dress for years, then turned to the Emperor, asking if he remembered her asking him to go to Madame Bertin's salon to acquire this very dress. The emperor thought for a moment, scrutinized the dress, then recalled the rose-like red gown, saying, "Yes, I remember. You wanted it very much." He then turned back to the empress, saying that Madame Bertin had refused him at the time, stating the dress was not for sale. He hadn't expected it to end up on the Duchess. "Carlyle," Her Majesty replied, saying that Madame Bertin was clearly fascinated by the lady. Owen suddenly decided to take the Duke's hand, leaning against Fairwind's chest, and saying that she wouldn't have been able to see this dress at all if it weren't for her dear husband's help. He had connections with Madame Bertin. Owen thought to herself that there were many people here who hadn't been at the last ball, and if she showed her sweet relationship with Fairwind, the rumors would spread quickly. "Ah, that's what the Emperor said." Leaning against her husband, Owen sincerely thanked him. Then, looking into Fairwind's eyes, Owen said, "Let me express my feelings right now." "Thank you, Fairwind." The Duke was stunned, not knowing how to answer her, and heard the Emperor laugh. He asked him why he was stunned. Was he shy in front of them? Fairwind blushed deeply at his words. Then His Majesty said it was time for them to leave them alone. They wouldn't be disturbed, and wished them a pleasant time. Owen wondered why he was shy, and suddenly saw a waiter coming over with glasses of wine. She turned to Fairwind and asked if he would like a drink. Fairwind said, "Please," and took her glass. He began to drink, lost in thought. Owen also took a few sips and said the wine was delicious. But suddenly Fairwind raised his hand, startling her. He asked her what she was doing. She didn't understand, saying she just wanted to have fun and not worry about anything. But the Duke said he didn't mean that, but rather her behavior in public. Wasn't this something she only did at home? Owen asked, confused, if he was referring to her praising him in front of the Emperor. Fairwind said he meant both that and the fact that she was the first to initiate physical contact with him. Like a deeply loving wife, the Duke of Carlisle said, embarrassed and blushing. Owen told him that she was his wife. Wasn't intimacy natural between husband and wife? The Duke, red as a tomato, said only when they were alone. The Duchess didn't let it go, angrily retorting, why couldn't she even in front of others? Suddenly, she felt someone watching her and turned to see a girl standing nearby, having overheard their conversation. Owen thought, "Oh, I accidentally raised my voice." Then, smiling at the Duke, she said in a soft voice that she just wanted to show that they had a good relationship as husband and wife. Fairwind closed his eyes and said there was no point in that, and he hadn't asked her to do so. She replied, should they sulk at each other now that they were attending such a celebration? Owen stepped closer to Fairwind and said, "You have to get used to me. Didn't you say you respected my choices?" Suddenly, she suggested, perhaps they could dance, but the Duke of Carlisle's gaze became formidable, as if he were contemplating something. Owen looked into his eyes and asked him what was wrong, why he had suddenly become like this. He put his arm around her, using his other hand to adjust her hair, telling her to fix it. Fairwind then told her to dress more conservatively and cover up more in front of others. "This is my request," the Duke said, looking firmly into her eyes. The surrounding girls watched them, whispering amongst themselves. Someone said, "My goodness, look how affectionate they are." Owen thought this was good too, the image of a loving couple, just right to leave a good impression on the local nobility. Then, looking at the Duke, she smiled and said, "Since you care so much about me, you should also let me." She raised her hand and gently wiped the corner of his mouth, making him blush even more. "What are you doing?" Fairwind asked. Owen covered her mouth with her hand, laughing, and replied that he had some wine on his lips. She asked Fairwind, shouldn't a wife take care of her husband? The Duke of Carlisle thought for a moment and then hugged Owen tightly. Then he whispered to her that she should be tender towards him not only in public. Owen blushed slightly and asked him what was wrong, if he was drunk. Fairwind replied, "Yes, like I'm drunk." Then he told her to just stand like that. He then asked her why she would hold his hand and lean against him outside, but wouldn't even touch him at home. Owen asked if it was true. Was this her duty as the Duchess? Fairwind looked at her in surprise, thinking that indeed, Owen didn't need to be his good wife forever. She promised him that she would only be a good wife to the Duke, but the Duke thought that this wasn't what he wanted and hugged her again. He told her not to force him to be too restrained, and added that she could express herself as she pleased. The girls standing next to them began whispering, saying they couldn't stand each other before, and wondering how the husband could now look so tenderly at his shrewish wife. They also started gossiping about the Duke of Sibling, saying that although he was talking to Baroness Razendil, his gaze was fixed on the Duchess. Duke Sabella raised his glass, his eyes focused on Owen. In his 20s and known for his flirtatious nature, his handsome features, tall stature, and charming smile had always made him one of the most sought-after bachelors. Considering the lack of a male heir to the throne, his chances of entering high society were extremely high, and many noble families were trying to build relationships with him. However, Sibyl's gaze remained fixed on Owen Lilius. The girls continued to gossip about the Duke, one of them mentioning that she had heard Sibyl had pursued Owen when she was still Princess Vermeer, proposing multiple times, only for the Duke of Carlisle to capture the girl's heart in a matter of seconds. Another girl remarked that he hadn't captured anyone's heart. It was merely a contract, signed personally by His Majesty the Emperor with the King of Wilma. But everyone knew that the Duke of Carlisle was the Emperor's right-hand man, and there were many rumors that the Duchess was originally supposed to marry the Emperor. Someone said that, but another girl countered, "Look how lovingly she looks at her husband, and how intently he gazes back at her. Who would have thought to steal Duchess Owen from the Duke of Carlisle?" After one girl finished speaking, the ball was in full swing, everyone dancing and enjoying themselves. Kate began to think, seeing everyone around them treating them as a loving couple, everything unfolding as she had planned, but was the protagonist overthinking things. Owen felt a little worried, recalling Fairwind's words, wondering what he truly meant, what he was trying to express. Perhaps she thought they were just drunken ramblings, but then the Duke called out to her. He told her she could worry about those words later. It was waltz time. The protagonist agreed, her gaze suddenly shifting to the girl standing next to the two men. Owen looked at her, tried to recall who the girl was, finally remembering her as Miss Stella Bell. Kate, knowing the ending of the story, frowned slightly. Then she turned to Fairwin, asking if he was close to Miss Bell as a child, and told him that Miss Bell was standing right there. Perhaps he could invite her to dance. "Don't worry, I'm not the type to get jealous of childhood friends," Owen said. He asked if that meant she intended to waltz with someone else. She replied that of course she would have given the chance. Everyone was free to dance at the ball, and told him not to mind her. But the Duke suddenly pulled her towards him, assuming the waltz position, saying it meant he would only dance with her. The musicians began to play a beautiful melody. Fairwin placed his hand on Kate's shoulder, and the two began to waltz, everyone around them stopping to watch them with admiring gazes. The protagonist herself enjoyed the dance, thinking to put everything else out of her mind for now. Owen Lilias had achieved her goal of showing everyone how well-suited they were. So now just enjoy the moment, the girl thought. Fairwin looked at her seriously, telling her to look into his eyes. They continued to dance, and this time the protagonist didn't look away. After the dance ended, Kate sat down on the sofa to rest, watching the others dance and play. With a smile, she thought that she still enjoyed dancing and was glad she had learned. Owen was drinking, and Fairwin came over and told her that for a first dance she did well. The protagonist thanked him and asked why he had been standing there. The Duke was about to say something about the next song when a servant suddenly interrupted them. The servant came over and said that the Duke of Carlisle wished to see His Majesty. The Duke immediately asked if it was him, and the servant replied yes, saying there was an urgent matter he had to tell him. Fairwin turned to his companion and took her hand. He made her promise not to let any other man's lips touch her wrist. The girl, surprised, asked him again. Kate said that when invited to dance, men kissed the lady's hand, so she should wait for him. He said with disgust that all men are wolves. Owen said that since he was also a wolf, he shouldn't come near her. Fairwin snorted, saying he was only worried about her. That's why he said that, and looked directly into her eyes. She just looked at him in surprise, but she didn't answer him. The ball continued, everyone dancing and enjoying themselves. Kate sat alone on the sofa, watching the others. The protagonist noticed that Marquis Celestine and Stella Bell were frequently asked to dance. Indeed, a noble's popularity was reflected in the number of invitations they received. Someone is being asked to dance, but why not me? Owen thought. Of course, everyone in this room could see how well she got along with her husband. But even so, she sat pouting, wondering if anyone would ask her to dance. Two boys ran up to Duke Carlisle and asked him to stop. One of the boys apologized and asked if he could have this dance with his wife. Fairwin turned around, smiling. Of course. He added, "Isn't it normal to dance with anyone at a ball?" and told them to inform the others. The two boys were overjoyed. The first thanked the Duke, and the second said that he, too, could dance with her then. "Certainly, if you want my family to be your enemy forever," Fairwin said with a straight face. Owen sat alone, thinking that Fairwin, being the Emperor's right-hand man, must be very busy. She understood why he would be called away mid-ball. The Duchess understood all this, but why had she been wandering around alone for 30 minutes? Stella Bell's friends also seemed to be avoiding her. When the Marchioness Celestine walked towards her, the girls immediately pulled her aside. Are they making fun of me? Owen wondered. Suddenly, someone approached, and she quickly brushed aside her thoughts, thinking it was Fairwyne. Unfortunately, it wasn't Fairwyne. A male voice spoke. The Duchess looked up and saw him. His Majesty the Emperor extended his hand and asked if she would grant him the pleasure of a dance. Kate said that His Majesty had just rescued her from the shackles of solitude and thanked him, but the Emperor didn't understand what she meant at first. When he finally understood, he burst out laughing, holding his head and saying she was quite the lady. Now he finally understood why everyone was acting that way. Come on, the performance is about to begin, the Emperor said. The gentlemen who had been watching Owen were surprised. One said that the Emperor was quite the joker, and another said that His Majesty knew Duke Carlisle would be angry, yet still invited the Duchess to dance. But what can the Duke say to His Majesty? Said another. Fairwyne was standing with a group of men, and the Emperor looked at Duke Carlisle with a triumphant smile. When he saw His Majesty with his wife, he was furious. The Emperor then turned to Owen and said that he hadn't kissed her hand yet, and asked if he might be permitted to rectify that oversight. The Duchess said no, that she was the one being impolite by not offering her hand first. The Emperor was about to kiss Owen's hand when, seemingly out of nowhere, Fairwyne appeared, kissed his wife's hand, and led her away from His Majesty. The Emperor said in surprise, "Do you have wheels on your shoes? You were just on the other side of the hall." The Duke asked what His Majesty intended to do with his wife. The Emperor laughed and asked, "With your wife?" He added, "When a flower is unattended, the bees will naturally come, won't they?" He then added that he merely wanted to dance with the Duchess. Fairwyne told him that this was Owen's first time at such an event, and she wasn't yet accustomed to it. Once she was, only he would dance with her. The Emperor laughed and said that was nonsense, then turned to the Duchess Carlisle and suggested they ditch that stick-in-the-mud Fairwyne and dance together. The Duchess wanted to retort that Fairwyne was right there, but His Majesty gestured for her to look at the Duke. She understood what he meant and glanced at the Duke, thinking that the Emperor was teasing Fairwyne. This was probably punishment for leaving her alone. Kate said, "Very well, Your Majesty," but she saw the Duke suddenly become uneasy, blushing, and looking distressed. The Duchess looked at the Duke and decided to take pity on him. So she offered her hand to Fairwyne, interlacing their fingers. "Please excuse us, Your Majesty. I'm only dancing with my husband today," Owen said, smiling. She looked into the Duke's eyes and said how could she refuse when he cared so much for her. Fairwyne looked at her, his face slightly flushed, but said nothing. They began to dance. The Emperor watched them and remarked that in the end, because of Fairwyne, he didn't get to dance with her. The Empress asked if he had intended to push Duke Carlisle towards the Duchess all along. He laughed and replied that he didn't know, but that was the result. He asked the Empress her opinion. The Empress said she didn't know what they had been fighting about for the past 4 years, but now they couldn't take their eyes off each other. At this rate, perhaps peace could be achieved between the Varisian Empire and the Wilma Duchy. But the Emperor interrupted her. "Wait, Wilma Duchy." He asked again, starting to recall something. He suddenly remembered the letter, which read, "My wife and I have encountered some difficulties in conceiving a child, so I hope to exchange experiences with the Duchess Carlisle. I'll look forward to meeting you soon." The Emperor suddenly declared with certainty that Duke Lilias had sent a letter. He had already contacted him, but had forgotten to mention something else. He added that if this matter was related to Duke Lilias, Fairwyne would become his target, and he needed to be prepared. The Emperor suddenly called out for Fairwyne to come over immediately. They needed to talk. Owen asked the Duke, "Didn't His Majesty just call for you?" Fairwyne replied nonchalantly, "His Majesty is clearly worried about something," Owen said. "It's all right, I'm talking to you," Fairwyne replied. Kate, with a smile, told him that he had left her alone not long ago, but it wasn't like that now. Fairwyne chuckled softly and looked away. She said she was just joking, that everything was fine, and he could go. The Duke said he would be back soon. It was probably nothing serious. Owen wondered if he was worried about himself, or about her. Kate sat at the table eating cake, while Owen watched the others with a melancholic expression. The situation was repeating itself, Owen thought. The nobles kept their distance from each other, only interacting with their own kind. Kate glanced towards Fairwyne and the Emperor, feeling that their conversation seemed like it would take a while. What are they talking about? Look at his serious expression, she sighed. Why sit alone when you have a partner? Owen suddenly realized she wanted to be near Fairwyne and was startled by her own thoughts, feeling like she almost blurted out that she wanted him. And there was clearly no other meaning to it. She genuinely felt affection. The only person she knew here was Fairwind. Kate was certain that he was the only one she could rely on. Owen looked at her cake, thinking that this was just how things were. The girls who had been observing Owen remarked that the Duke had finally left the Duchess. One girl said that now was their chance to talk to her, and another agreed, saying she also wanted to chat with Duchess Owen. The first girl confessed that she really wanted to introduce herself, but hadn't dared to approach Owen. She seemed too aloof. She added that she was afraid of embarrassing herself in front of the Duchess. Her beauty was simply dazzling. The second girl comforted her, saying that she was also beautiful and shouldn't feel bad. It wasn't that they were ugly, it was just that the Duchess Carlisle was exceptionally beautiful. As they whispered amongst themselves, the Duchess Carlisle suddenly disappeared. "We missed such a good opportunity. Maybe we should have taken the initiative," the first girl said regretfully. The Rose Garden of the Trajan Empire was the largest on the continent. During the day, it was one of the most popular places for nobles from various countries to visit, but at night, all the couples would gather in the garden to kiss. Owen walked on, puzzled, wondering what everyone was doing. She finally understood why there were so many people at the beginning of the ball, but now they had all disappeared. They hadn't intended to return at all, wanting only to continue indulging in their love. She hadn't understood why there wasn't a single lamp in the garden before, but now she finally realized that it was a hiding place for all lovers. "I better go back to the hall and sit alone." Kate thought this and was about to leave when she turned and saw him, Duke Carlisle. Fairwind leaned against a pillar, his hand resting on it, standing very close. Owen looked at him and called out, "Fairwind." He looked at her seriously and said that she wasn't afraid to come here alone anymore. 15 minutes ago, the Emperor had told Duke Carlisle that Duke Lilia's was coming next week, and this time he was coming alone, so Fairwind should come with his wife. Fairwind asked him, "Isn't he coming with his wife?" The Emperor said that she was pregnant, so he had her stay home. After all, this visit wasn't that important. He also asked, "Don't you know why he's coming even though he's alone?" Fairwind thought for a moment. Leon Lilia's was the new Duke of the Wilma Duchy. The previous one had died suddenly in the war. The only time Fairwind had met him was at his own wedding. It wasn't easy for the lord of a duchy to visit another country, so there must be an important reason this time. Fairwind asked the Emperor if it was because of Owen and the child that he was coming, and the Emperor replied that it was. His Majesty said that Duke Lilia's was very worried that they didn't have children yet, and was also worried that his sister would be under pressure because of it. Duke Carlisle replied that they had been married for 5 years, and everyone seemed to be overly concerned. The Emperor asked him if he was capable of having children, but that it wasn't yet time for an heir, and said he only mentioned it because Fairwind seemed so confident in his abilities. Fairwind said that was just a private conversation with family, as he was learning things. His Majesty replied that word travels fast, didn't he know? The Emperor summarized, telling Fairwind not to worry about an heir, as he wasn't the Emperor, but the head of his family, meaning they could have children on their own time. After he finished speaking, Fairwind looked sadly at his wife. The Emperor continued, saying that he should understand himself that wanting children doesn't mean having them immediately. Fairwind suddenly thought of something, and His Majesty called out to him, asking if he remembered what he had just said. Fairwind coughed, saying of course he did. The Emperor warned him that the Duke would be staying in his territory, and if he felt his sister was unhappy there, he could take her with him. When Fairwind turned to go to the table where Owen was sitting, he found she was no longer there. He turned to His Majesty and said he had urgent business and needed to leave. Fairwind asked someone if they knew where his wife was, and they said they heard she was heading towards the Rose Garden. The Emperor said with a smile, "No wonder it hadn't reached the children yet. What are you doing here? Didn't I say I would come back? I couldn't wait." Fairwind calmly asked Owen. "I was waiting for you," Owen replied. Fairwind said, "I waited and then came here." Owen said she was always bored alone, and he could at least introduce her to his friends. Why did he always leave her by herself? He listened to her and then asked, "So that's why you came here? Do you know what kind of place this is?" Fairwind told her he had been looking for her for a long time. Suddenly, he looked around and said it would be nice if there was mistletoe here. Fairwind continued, asking if she knew that people say if lovers kiss under the mistletoe, they will be happy forever. Owen said discontentedly that she knew, but what did that have to do with them? He asked, didn't it have anything to do with them? Owen hesitated, unsure how to answer. She blurted out that they were husband and wife, not lovers. Owen's words shocked Fairwind. He embraced her, saying that husband and wife could also be lovers and could also love each other. Owen asked if they were in love, and he replied yes, adding that at least he was. Was it the air that intoxicated them, or were they mesmerized by the surrounding atmosphere? Why was he like this? Owen thought. Hadn't he told her not to disturb his heart? But why are you doing this to me? She said in her heart. Fairwind suddenly heard someone say they saw him coming this way. Owen didn't understand what was happening and asked what was going on. He told her not to move and said he would explain later. Suddenly, Fairwind almost kissed Owen's lips. Duke Sabella walked outside, followed by his companion, looking for Duchess Irwyne. His companion said that perhaps Duchess Carlisle was heading home. He replied that he did see her going that way and asked why she always bothered him. Owen thought to herself that she just wanted to fill the void in his heart, thinking her presence would be better. Owen thought Fairwind was going to kiss her. She didn't understand what was wrong with him. First, he was angry, and then he talked about mistletoe. What was going on? Owen thought. Suddenly, she saw Duke Sabella walking towards them. He walked around the garden, asking where Duchess Irwyne had gone, as he wanted to chat with her more intimately. His companion said that if Duke Carlisle caught him, he had threatened that anyone who approached the Duchess would become his enemy. Sabella said Fairwind didn't understand how to truly interact with women, so he probably wasn't here. He suddenly said that Fairwind Carlisle looked more like a piece of wood than a man. Owen heard these words. Owen was angry, thinking they didn't understand him at all. Fairwind wasn't a piece of wood. He was a torch that had been lit and would now burn forever. Duke Sabella continued, saying that the Duchess was indeed beautiful, and he wanted to see her up close. He said maybe she was over there, and then walked in their direction. Owen was scared and kissed Fairwind on the lips. He hadn't expected this either. After the kiss, she looked at him, thinking she had only intended to pretend to kiss him, to convince the still suspicious fair one, Sabella. Then she thought, stop it, why was she angry because of Sabella's words? While she was still thinking, Fairwind kissed her again and put his arms around her waist. Duke Sabella saw them and said he thought there was only one girl there, but it turned out there were two. Since it was dark, Duke Sabella couldn't see clearly who was there and remarked that Owen could never kiss someone so passionately. His companion said they had already searched the whole area, and it seemed the Duchess had gone home. Finally, he agreed, saying Owen had never enjoyed these social events from the beginning. He pulled her closer, saying he couldn't just leave like this. His companion said they couldn't do this here, but Sabella told her it was dark and no one would see. They embraced and began to kiss. At that moment, Owen pushed Fairwind away and shouted, enough. Blushing, he apologized to her, saying that she had started it and he couldn't stop, promising to be more careful in the future. Fairwind said she should be the one apologizing since she was the one who touched his lips first. Then she said she was angry with Duke Sabella. He seemed like a decent person, so why would he say such foolish things? Owen suddenly became angry and told her not to talk about other men in front of him. Fairwind asked him, what are you talking about again? Everything was fine. Why are you bringing up Fairwind again and thinking about these things? She then added that he was angry with her. Owen took her hand and said he wasn't angry with her, but with those who dared to look at her with disrespect. He added that he also didn't like the way she looked at other people. He said he wanted his wife to only look at him. Fairwind looked at him, thinking she didn't understand why Owen had been acting like this lately. Sometimes he wanted her to be gentle with him. Sometimes he told her not to hold back, and now he wanted her to only look at him. She didn't understand if any of this was real. What if I don't love you? Fairwind suddenly asked him. Owen replied that it didn't matter, because he loved her more than anything in the world. Fairwind was surprised, wondering if he really loved her. It wasn't like this in the novel. She asked him to say it again. Owen stepped closer, touched her lips with his finger, and said, Owen Carlisle loves Fairwind Lilith. He added that he was telling her this from the bottom of his heart. He swore. Then he asked, please be honest with me. What are your feelings for me? Fairwind wondered if he was being sincere or just caught up in the moment. But what was wrong with her? Her heart was pounding. Fairwind pulled her hand away and said, I'm sorry. I can't give you the same answer. Owen, clearly not expecting this response, looked at her with sadness in his eyes. Owen asked her if she was serious. Fairwind told him that she didn't dislike him. She continued, saying that from that perspective, they were indeed a couple with a good relationship. But Owen interrupted her, crying out. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and he asked her to stop talking. Fairwind reached out and touched his cheek, telling him not to cry. She looked into his eyes and said it made her sad to see him cry. Owen turned his head away and told her to forget what he had said. While he was drunk, Fairwind wanted to say something to him, but Owen interrupted her, turning away and saying, please forget everything I said. I'm crying right now. After a while, they left the palace and returned home. As Owen and Fairwind entered the hall, Mrs. Tilly greeted them. She decided to turn to Owen and ask if he would like to spend the night together again. Owen glared at Mrs. Tilly and asked her why she thought they were in a bad mood. The housekeeper, surprised by his reaction, asked if something had happened at the ball. Owen turned away, saying nothing had happened, and went upstairs to his room. Mrs. Tilly asked Fairwyne, with concern, if they had quarreled. Fairwyne sadly replied that that wasn't the issue. The housekeeper said Owen had been sulky since he was a child and always made that expression when he was upset. Fairwyne thought that perhaps he didn't like her honest answer to his confession, or maybe he was expecting a different response. By then, Owen had already entered his room and angrily took off his coat. He thought to himself that, as expected, he was the only one with feelings in this relationship. Sitting in a chair, he covered his face with his hands and sighed heavily, saying he wished she had lied. He had always wanted to hear her say, "I love you." Maybe he was asking for too much, Owen thought. Holding his head, he continued to think that he shouldn't have kissed her. Even if Duke Sabella had seen them, it wasn't worth it. Of course, he had only intended to pretend, but he lost himself in her. She was the one who touched him first. The kiss was so sweet that it made him dizzy. He thought she had feelings for him too, and it all exploded in that kiss. However, he imagined what she might say to him, and how she could possibly love him. Fairwyne told herself to pull herself together. Owen certainly wouldn't say those things, but what did it matter? He began to feel restless and the room stuffy, so he decided to go out for some air. When Owen opened the door, he saw Mrs. Tilly and Fairwyne standing there. Fairwyne, hearing the door open, turned around, but he had already slammed it shut. He and Mrs. Tilly looked at the door in confusion. Fairwyne stood behind the door, breathing heavily, her cheeks flushed. He felt his body react involuntarily only when he saw Owen. He wondered if he would feel better if he kept his distance from her, so he decided he had to stay away from her. Sometime later, a few days later, Owen and Mrs. Tilly were having breakfast in the garden of the manor. The housekeeper couldn't believe her ears and asked again, was the Duke really avoiding her? Kate said that recently he had been leaving early at dawn and returning only after she had gone to bed. Even when he was home, it was as if he was deliberately avoiding her. She thought the Duke was angry, but she didn't understand why. Mrs. Tilly said that perhaps she should tell Fairwyne about what happened at the ball. Fairwyne told her everything that had happened at the ball, from their arrival to their departure. The housekeeper suddenly asked Fairwyne if she really didn't understand why Owen was angry. Kate looked at her in surprise and said she didn't understand, asking her since she had been his nanny. So, had he always been so temperamental? Mrs. Tilly assured her that no. Although he was stern and silent, he was very polite and kind. He once brought a stray kitten to bed with him. Owen lowered his head and said she now completely understood why he was only angry with her. The servants and maids were seeing Duke Sabella off when Fairwyne suddenly spoke, his back to everyone, saying a friend had complained to him, saying he kissed a girl and was rejected, but he still confessed his feelings. Mrs. Tilly and Mary Ann listened with amusement, speculating about who the gentleman was talking about. He added that although it had nothing to do with him, he was just interested in what it meant. The housekeeper said they finally kissed. Everyone knew the atmosphere of a ball could easily lead to such things, and asked if the gentleman would kiss her again. The Duke blushed and said it wasn't him, it was his friend. His friend said the important thing was being rejected after the kiss. The maids and Mrs. Tilly were all touched by his answer. Alfred stood at the back pondering, then said maybe he had kissed her against her will. Everyone looked at Alfred in horror, and he added that it must have been the boy's fault. If he had kissed her properly, she wouldn't have had a chance to refuse. Duke Sabella sighed, holding his head in his hands, and said that wasn't the point at all. The atmosphere was good. Everything was perfect. She rejected his friend after hearing his confession. The aide said maybe he was just out of breath from the kiss, at which point a maid hit him from behind. Mrs. Tilly approached Fairwyne and told him that even if he was rejected, it wasn't the end of the world and he should move on. The Duke replied that he didn't know, because it wasn't him, it was a friend. The housekeeper interrupted him, saying all right. They all understood and told him to pass those words on to his friend. She added that whether she hated him or not, he should try again. Opportunities don't come to those who don't try. Fairwyne pondered for a moment, frowned, and said all right, I'll tell him. The next morning, on a bright sunny day, Duke Sabella was at the Emperor's palace. Fairwyne sat, recalling Mrs. Tilly's words, telling him to try again whether she hated him or not. Opportunities don't come to those who don't try. At first, the Duke really wanted to try, but then he wondered how he could do it with Owen. The Duke wondered whether to send her flowers, jewelry, or simply a piece of land. The Emperor sat opposite him, observing him carefully. Fairwyne's mind was full of her, thinking it would be better to have a meal together first, find an opportunity to chat during the meal, and try again. He suddenly clenched his teeth, his heart racing at the thought of her. So he decided that when they had dinner, he must make her dress conservatively. The Emperor started calling him, and the Duke came back to his senses, saying he was listening. I said I've cleared my schedule, and will be coming over tomorrow. You don't mind, do you? The Emperor asked. Duke Sibelius said he didn't understand what he was talking about, and the Emperor said that meant he hadn't been listening. Then he added that he was talking about Duke Lilia. Whether the visit was postponed or not, it didn't matter. It would happen anyway, so he should be prepared. Ferdinand inquired once again if everything would be held at his estate. The Emperor retorted that Ferdinand seemed to have forgotten what he'd said and done at the ball. The Duke apologized, and His Majesty continued, explaining that the Duke would speak with him at the palace first, and only then visit his estate. He was visiting Ferdinand after refusing many other nobles, so preparations were essential. Farewell began to think. Duke Lilia was a member of Owen's family and deserved respect. She decided to speak with Owen personally. He wrote a letter to Kate, apologizing and expressing his wish to have dinner with her that evening. He also asked her to wear a less revealing dress, as it would be cold. Owen pondered the meaning. She knew she had done something wrong, but what did the last sentence mean? They would be dining indoors. How could it be cold? Nevertheless, she dressed as he requested. Mrs. Tilly informed Fairwin that dinner was ready. Fairwin replied that she would be down shortly. The housekeeper told Fairwin that there were many hot dishes on the menu today. Was her dress too warm, perhaps? Kate looked at her own dress and agreed it was possible. Fairwin wondered what Owen was worried about. They would be eating inside, and the menu was full of hot dishes. The Duchess decided to change. Mrs. Tilly offered to help. The Duke of Carlisle was already seated at the dining table, waiting for Owen, sipping water. Finally, Fairwin arrived, calling out to him. Owen looked up. Owen, wearing a Valli low-cut gown, smoothed her hair and asked with a smile if he had been waiting long. Owen's smile faded. He told her he had asked her to dress more conservatively. Kate replied that this dress had been prepared in advance and she couldn't change it. Then she asked if there was a particular reason for his request or if it was simply his personal preference. The Duke told her there wasn't. She responded that wearing something too covering would be too warm, which was why she hadn't. She was always warm. Suddenly, Owen grabbed his napkin and wiped his face. Both Kate and the maid looked at him in surprise. He declared that he was feeling hot now, too. Then take off your jacket. You're sitting there in your jacket. No wonder you're sweating, Kate told him. The Duke agreed and began to remove his jacket, rolling up his shirt sleeves to reveal his strong arms. At the sight, Owen coughed and turned her head, her face flushing. Owen's reaction brought a slight smile to Owen's face. He found her shyness endearing. He then began to unbutton his shirt, revealing his well-built chest. Kate peeked at him through her fingers. Alfred approached the Duke, suggesting he might change into something more comfortable. Suddenly, the maid grabbed him, whispering that he seemed to have forgotten Mrs. Tilly's words. He didn't recall. The maid apologized to them and led Alfred away. Owen finally sat down and said to the Duke, "If you're so hot, why don't you take it all off? Your reaction is amusing. Do you not like my body?" The Duke of Carlisle asked. Kate asked him why he would ask such a personal question. The Duke replied that he was her husband. Wasn't he entitled to ask such a question? She retorted, asking why she should tell him her preferences. The Duke said he simply wanted to please her. Owen told him he had been acting strangely lately. The Duke asked, surprised, what she meant. Kate explained that it wasn't that he was distant, but rather that his behavior was awkward. She asked if they could go back to how things were before. Owen sighed and asked what it had been like before. She replied that he had respected her, and she him, and their relationship had been quiet and peaceful. Kate said everything had been fine before the ball. He told her it was impossible to go back. The Duke poured himself some wine, stating that she had changed, and he had changed too. Kate took the bottle, commenting that he had started drinking heavily. Then she informed him that Duke Lilia and her brother, Leon, would be arriving tomorrow. She asked if he intended to drink in front of them. Suddenly, he reached out, took the wine bottle, and embraced her from behind. Looking in her eyes, he said, "You know, we have to act like a loving couple in front of Duke Lilia." He added that they even needed to appear intimate, without any awkwardness. He began to explain that their marriage wasn't a private matter, but a symbol of peace between two parties. Duke Lilia had refused other nobles and was coming to visit only them, meaning he would be observing their behavior and their private life. Kate suddenly understood what this meant. Was he worried that they had to be more intimate in front of Duke Lilia? And had he been distant because he felt awkward around her? Now it all makes sense, Kate thought. Fairwin's strange behavior after the ball could be explained by the news of the Duke's arrival. Yes, he was just worried, nothing more. They were just a product of an agreement between two countries. In the original story, Fairwin didn't even like Owen. Smiling, the Duchess told Duke Carlisle that she was ready. Everything would go smoothly, and she would cooperate, so he needn't worry. Fairwind asked her about the cooperation again, and confirmed some other details. "Which details are you referring to?" she asked. The Duke said he was referring to unity. The elders of the family were predicting an auspicious day for conception soon, and everyone was waiting. He couldn't do anything about it. Kate sat on his lap and said, "Well, we already talked about this in the carriage." He told her he wouldn't touch or embrace her without permission. She made him promise to keep his word, so she wouldn't have to use the sachet again, and his patience wouldn't be at risk. Duke Carlisle exclaimed angrily, saying she wasn't at risk at all. Owen put a hand on his shoulder to soothe him, saying he only embraced her like that when he was drunk. Fairwind wrapped her arms around her waist and rested his head against her chest. She didn't say anything, just let him stay like that. Everything was fine. The next morning, Duke Leon Lilia of Wilma had already arrived at the Imperial Palace. The Emperor told him he looked handsome and offered his congratulations upon hearing that his wife was pregnant. The Duke thanked him, saying that the hardships they endured for the child only made their happiness greater. Duke Lilia then remarked that he hadn't seen Duke Carlisle. His Majesty then remembered that Fairwind had sent a letter beforehand, explaining his absence due to a hangover. The Emperor decided to invite the Duke of Wilma to the reception room, where refreshments were served. Kate entered Fairwind's room, announcing herself before entering. Duke Carlisle greeted her shirtless, smiling. "You're here," he said. She reminded him, "You're not dressed yet. Drink this first, then get dressed. Honey water is best for a hangover." Fairwind said to her, "Now you're not even surprised." Owen, with his eyes closed, replied, "You've seen me like this many times. You're used to it by now." He took the cup and thanked her, saying he would gladly drink it. The girl looked at him, thinking to herself that she still couldn't get used to his bare body. Then, blushing, she asked him what the urgent matter was that he had mentioned before. The Duke asked her to help him choose his clothes because he wasn't very good at it and wanted to look presentable in front of his wife. The schedule for Duke Lilia's visit lay on the table. As Fairwind put on his shirt, he looked at Kate with a sharp gaze and told her he was going to change his trousers, and she could watch if she wanted. Blushing furiously, Owen yelled, "No, I don't want to see," and covered her face with her hands. Seeing her so shy, Fairwind just laughed. She asked if he was dressed, and the Duke replied that he was. Still covering her eyes with her hands, she said he was lying and told him to button up. Duke Carlisle walked up to her and took her hands. He then placed her hands on his chest, and Owen looked directly into his eyes. Fairwind told her that Duke Lilia was her brother, so he wanted to present themselves well. Then he asked if she wanted that too. The girl replied, of course. He said, "Then let's try," and taking her hand in his, Owen said, "Let's be together like a diligent couple." Dressed and ready to receive their guest, the Duke and Duchess of Carlisle went downstairs. Mrs. Tilly greeted them at the bottom of the stairs, telling the Duchess she was just about to look for her because Duke Lilia had arrived. Fairwind asked how that was possible. Wasn't he supposed to arrive later? The maid replied that she thought they should go to the reception area. They entered the reception room, and the Duke greeted Duke Lilia. Leon was standing, looking at a painting. Duke Carlisle approached the Duke of Wilma, intending to shake his hand and say he hoped his journey had been pleasant. But the Duke walked straight past Fairwind and towards his sister. Duke Lilia approached Owen and stood before her. She thought that if she acted as she usually did, the Duke of Wilma would surely find her behavior strange. Considering Owen's personality in the original story, shouldn't she act deliberately indifferent? She asked herself. Then she pondered how she should address him. Duke Lilia, seeing this, finally spoke, smiling. "Owen, my dear sister, I've missed you so much." He then asked if she was feeling unwell, as he hadn't heard from her in a while and had been worried. The Duchess replied with a gentle smile, "I'm perfectly fine, Duke Lilia." But he told her, "What Duke? I forbid you to use such a title. We're siblings." He told her to call him brother, as usual, and Duke Lilia stroked her hair, telling her that he knew her gentle voice and warm heart, that nothing would change. Fairwind suddenly asked the Duke about his health. He turned to him, saying it was generally good, and asked if Fairwind had felt unwell that morning, as the Emperor had mentioned. Duke Carlisle replied that he was much better now. Duke Lilia said he knew something seemed to be missing within him, but Fairwind didn't understand what he meant. Owen's brother then asked Duke Carlisle if he could excuse them for a moment, as he hadn't seen his sister in a long time and wanted to speak with her alone. Fairwind said of course, and then approached Owen. He winked at her, implying they should act like a normal married couple, and pointed to his cheek. Kate understood what he meant, but instead of kissing his cheek, she kissed his lips. Fairwind blushed slightly and said goodbye, saying he had to go to work, and she could find him if she needed anything. Owen thought to herself that she was supposed to kiss his cheek, but accidentally kissed his lips instead. Duke Lilia suddenly asked if everything was all right between her and her husband, as people usually don't react so strongly to a kiss. She blushed completely and told him everything was fine. She said she was just shy, but her brother said it wasn't shyness. At this point, Owen herself blushed, and Duke Lilia asked again if she was feeling unwell, as her face was red. He said she didn't look angry, nor did she seem unwell, and asked if she had a fever. Kate said she was fine and offered to show him around the estate. They walked in the garden, and Duke Lilia told her he was glad she was living in such a nice place and apologized for not visiting her after the wedding. Emily's health had been too poor to travel. Owen told him everything was fine and wanted to ask about the Duchess, but he stroked her hair and reassured her not to worry, that the pregnancy was going well and he was just waiting for her to be healthy and stable before visiting. He also said he felt ashamed for not taking better care of her and asked if Fairwind was treating her well and how they were getting along. Kate wondered how to answer. They had barely spoken in 4 years, so there was no intimacy to speak of, and she couldn't tell him that. After a moment of thought, she simply replied, "Good." Duke Lilia asked again if he was good to her, and she again replied, "Of course." A while later, they sat down for dinner together, and her brother attentively urged Owen to try a dish, saying it was delicious. After she thanked him, Duke Lilia told Fairwind that he and his sister had toured the estate and that everything was beautiful, the garden full of flowers and the bedroom very cozy. Duke Carlisle said he was glad he liked it. Owen's brother then said he was a little curious and wanted to ask a question. He said he wasn't sure if he was being too casual with Owen, but he also wanted to know about their intimacy. Owen was stunned and asked what he was talking about. Duke Lilia continued eating as if nothing had happened, saying he was referring to their marital bedroom. How could the entire bed and room look like no one had been there for a long time? Owen was also startled by his words and said, "Brother, wait," but Fairwind interrupted her, reaching out to cup her chin. He said there was no rule that a married couple could only sleep in the marital bedroom. Duke Lilia angrily asked again, saying he still didn't quite understand what that meant. "What I mean is," Fairwind replied, "a married couple can sleep in places other than the bedroom." The maids began to whisper amongst themselves, wondering if it was in the cottage, then mentioning blood on the blanket. "No way," another maid said. Fairwind suddenly asked Kate if she remembered that time in the cottage, when she went there first to wait for him. It was his best night, just the two of them. Kate thought to herself, so this was how he aired their private matters publicly. All right, she thought, but why did he have to mention the bed directly? Her brother asked if it was true, and she replied that it was that sometimes they wanted to try new places. Duke Lilia asked if it was really worth going all the way to the cottage, and she replied that they liked it there. Owen's brother turned to Fairwind again and asked if it was true, and Fairwind tapped his fingers on the table. Duke Carlisle took his wife's hand and kissed it, saying he was glad she liked it. After a while, Owen was getting sleepy. She started yawning, and Duke Lilia told his sister that she was probably tired after drinking and that she should go rest. He and Fairwind would chat a little longer. She bid them good night, and Duke Carlisle kissed her, saying good night, Owen. After the kiss, these words echoed in Owen's mind, chasing away all traces of sleep. They sat down in chairs, and Duke Lilia asked Fairwind if he was still drunk. He replied that he certainly wasn't. Duke Carlisle remarked to him that it felt like they had just seen each other on the battlefield yesterday, and it was good to see him under such different circumstances. Fairwind replied that he was also pleased, although their relationship wasn't the most comfortable. Owen thought to herself, why did the atmosphere suddenly turn cold? Duke Lilia had never shown this expression in front of her before, but Fairwind had indeed met him on the battlefield. Duke Lilia wasn't actually the worst person. It was he who persuaded Owen's father, who had never acknowledged his illegitimate children, to accept her and grant her the Lilia surname. And Wilma's provocation was meant to repair the relationship between the two countries, damaged by the Duke's attack. A year after the wedding, Owen's, Duke Lilia's, father passed away and Leon became the Duke, ruling Wilma. The Empire was, of course, helping the once defeated nation, but this also showed that he was fully capable of controlling the situation. Fairwind also sat, looking at the Duke, thinking that he was the husband of his beloved sister. He was clearly much better than the person who had once threatened Owen. Yet Fairwind still treated this marriage as a means to improve relations between the two countries. Of course, if Owen was happy, it wasn't a bad thing. He thought to himself that in Wilma, Owen was the Duke's daughter who appeared out of nowhere, and everyone concealed the fact that she was illegitimate. But rumors about this spread throughout the empire. When Owen, who had once been a tavern maid, suddenly became a Wilma princess, people viciously insulted her, saying she would always be just a bastard. Owen's reason for marrying Fairwyne was simple. She knew she couldn't have a peaceful and happy life in her homeland. Fairwyne had accepted the fact that Owen was illegitimate before the marriage, because in the Taresian Empire, such things were much easier to deal with. And Leon believed that as soon as an heir was born, one of them would become the legitimate heir of the Carlisle family. Duke Lilia suddenly asked Owen why she hadn't taken him to see the cottage. Was it their secret marital hideaway? Owen replied that it was. Leon continued, saying that the bedroom wasn't working, so they tried the cottage. He told the Duke to listen carefully, but not to mind. Fairwyne suddenly asked what he was talking about, what he meant by not working. He replied that, to be honest, he suspected he was incapable in that regard. Owen cried out that this was complete nonsense. Duke Lilia countered, then why was there no news after so long, if he understood what he was saying? Fairwyne was momentarily at a loss for words. Duke Lilia continued, saying it was all right. He had heard and knew how carefully Owen was raised. How could someone constantly angry maintain their mood, control their temper, and have children? He added that he and his wife hadn't had children for a long time simply because they weren't ready to be parents. Even when everything seemed to be going well, there had been a miscarriage. But after learning a secret about pregnancy, his wife finally conceived. Fairwyne wanted to say something, but Duke Lilia didn't give him a chance, continuing to say that he only hoped Owen could calmly and happily conceive a healthy child, and if they wanted one, it was up to him to put in the effort. Leon reminded him that he was the 6th generation of the family and understood the responsibility on his shoulders. According to Owen's description, many elders were indeed wise, but not very helpful in terms of guidance. So, what's your suggestion? Fairwyne asked. Duke Lilia replied that the first thing to do was to instruct the kitchen to prepare a delicious dinner for the man, and he had also noticed a lady named Mrs. Tilly being very proactive in this regard. But the most important thing was yet to come, Leon said, pointing to the book. The next day, Owen had already received the book. She thought to herself, the title is written inside. Could it be an adult novel? Fairwyne told her that it was recommended by an acquaintance and asked her to read it and tell him her thoughts. The girl read, curious about who this acquaintance was. While Owen was reading, Marianne suddenly came in and called for her. She was startled. Kate asked what was wrong, what had happened. The maid replied that the elders had arrived and were waiting for her. Marianne suddenly asked if Owen was feeling unwell because her face was very red. Owen didn't know how to respond. The maid continued, saying that everyone had been talking about a virus going around lately, and if she wasn't feeling well, she could rest. But Kate assured her she was fine and would go down now. Meanwhile, Fairwyne and the Emperor were hunting and spotted 2 deer. Duke Carlisle fired but missed the deer. The Emperor asked him what was wrong. How could the angelic archer, Fairwyne Carlisle, miss his shot? He replied that he would try again. He aimed again, thinking that this was all Duke Lilia's fault. Ever since reading that book, he couldn't stop thinking about it and kept imagining Owen as the main character. The Emperor placed a hand on his shoulder, commenting that he seemed distracted. The Emperor added that Duke Lilia seemed worried about his lack of real skills, having told him he needed to be made into a real man. The Emperor asked if there was a secret between them. Fairwyne wouldn't say, only replying that there wasn't anything like that. The Emperor chuckled, saying he should be careful with such matters. Just then, a servant approached, begging their pardon. Addressing Fairwyne, the servant bowed to the Emperor and Duke Carlisle, explaining there was a letter for the Duke. Fairwyne opened and read the letter, then informed the Emperor that it seemed he wouldn't be able to attend the banquet for Duke Celestine, and begged His Majesty's forgiveness. The Emperor, confused, asked why. Since Duke Lilia would also be attending, why wouldn't he go? The Duke handed him the letter. It read, "We have learned the date of the night of union. We await you." After reading it, the Emperor said that in that case, he wouldn't press the matter. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Owen had announced that tonight was the night of union. An elder commented that the astrologer had specifically calculated the optimal day for conception and had been handsomely rewarded. Another elder added that it was an auspicious night. Slightly surprised, Owen remarked that it was all so sudden, meaning she had only learned about it on April 30th. The elders confirmed that was correct. The Duke and Duchess's bedroom had been prepared. Candles were lit and rose petals scattered across the room. Owen sat on the sofa, extremely nervous. She told herself it was bound to happen sooner or later. An hour earlier, the maids were preparing her for the night. One maid mentioned hearing that a skilled astrologer had deemed the night of union a good omen. The maid said that the estate would finally hear the cries of a child. Owen asked Mrs. Tilly if, with her brother still at the estate, tonight was truly all right. The head maid replied that Duke Lilia had received an invitation from Marquis Celestine and would be visiting him tonight. Mrs. Tilly chuckled, adding that he had gently explained the situation to her and departed, a clever man indeed. Kate felt she should be ready. She and Fairwind had made promises to each other, so there was no need to worry. Marianne approached Owen, telling her the dress was ready. Owen said there was no need for a dress in this situation. Mrs. Tilly asked what she meant. Owen explained she just wanted to wear a robe. It was a good idea, anyway. Owen then decided she would wear both. As Marianne helped Owen dress, Kate asked if the robe would come open. Marianne replied that the whole point of a robe was that it did come open. As she spoke, Marianne demonstrated untying the robe's ribbon. The robe immediately fell open to the floor. Owen quickly told her to tie it again. The maid remarked that now that she knew, she shouldn't forget to use it, but she added that it would be best to let the gentleman know about this detail. Owen thought to herself that it would be impossible for him to untie it himself. Fairwind certainly wouldn't touch her. Suddenly, Mrs. Tilly announced that Mr. Fairwind had arrived. Owen was already in the bedroom, sitting on the sofa, waiting for Duke Carlisle. Fairwind entered and said to her, "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting." The preparations took longer than expected. The Duke sat beside her, looked into her eyes, then took out some wine and poured it into glasses. Kate, looking at the wine, blushed and covered her face with her hands. Fairwind raised his glass, saying that tonight was the second night they were alone together. He asked if she remembered the last time they were drunk and lost control and why that happened. Owen asked him why they drank the first time. The Duke replied that back then, she rejected him completely, and it was difficult to bear while sober. He added that they had both changed now, so he wanted to relive their first night together properly. Fairwind raised his glass and said, "To this wonderful night, Owen." Owen raised her glass as well, and they clinked glasses. Owen began to drink. The Duke watched her with adoration in his eyes, then told her she was cute. She said he was acting like he was already drunk. She added that his clothes were almost falling off. The Duke asked if she had noticed. Blushing, she didn't answer, thinking to herself how could she not have noticed. Suddenly, Fairwind touched her lips with his finger, saying he was doing his best to seduce her. He then mentioned the novel he'd given her, saying it was supposed to help with marital relations. She thought to herself, no wonder she found it strange that he suddenly gave her that book. It was all to seduce her. Fairwind told her the decision was, of course, hers, and if she didn't want to, he would never force her to do anything. He leaned closer to her lips, letting her decide whether to approach him. Owen suddenly stood up and turned away, saying no, enough. "I can't take it anymore." The Duke asked if she truly didn't want to and begged her not to leave, saying he needed her. Owen thought she couldn't ignore the power of the original story. Fairwind would eventually end up with Stella, so she shouldn't agree, and she couldn't hurt him. After all, the novel was called Fairwind and Stella, and she was only in the first few pages of their story. Fairwind would eventually be happy with Stella, and she just needed to survive safely. With this ending, everyone should be happy, she thought. But why did the thought make her soul feel shattered? Then, Owen suddenly told the Duke that their marriage was in name only. He married her only for diplomatic peace between their two countries. Fairwind asked if she really thought that. Owen sat on the bed, closed her eyes, and told him not to look at her with those eyes that looked like he was about to cry. He asked if she'd heard the rumors, the ones saying the Carlisle couple not only didn't want children, but couldn't have them, especially the accusations directed at him, as if he had withered into a dry branch. Owen told him not to be fooled by those who didn't know their situation. It was their own business. The Duke held her hand and agreed, saying they knew their family situation better than anyone. But did she know how worried he was about her, how much he longed for her? He said if she didn't want to, nothing would happen. They would each return to their rooms and forget everything. "But you want me to, don't you?" Duke Carlisle held her hand and placed it on his chest. She didn't answer. He asked again, "Am I not attractive to you?" She retorted, "That's not the issue." Fairwind told her not to treat him like a fool, but she suddenly wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. Fairwind Carlisle had once been heartbroken and closed himself off because of Owen. He wouldn't forget her indifferent look the day they first met. But for her, the Duke began to change little by little. And while Owen was thinking about all this, she overlooked one detail. The heroine herself was also changing along with him. Owen sat on his lap and said she really wanted him. The Duke gazed into her eyes, and after a moment, threw her onto the bed and laid down beside her. Fairwind said, "So quickly, I already belong entirely to you." In the early morning, the girl woke up and started doing sit-ups in bed. She opened her eyes and moved her body, aching all over. She groaned and suddenly turned to find a naked Fairwind Carlyle holding her. She looked at him, blushing, thinking who would have thought such a serious man could be so passionate at night. But he suddenly interlocked his fingers with hers, and she was surprised, wondering if he was still asleep. Fairwind smiled and said he was awakened by the kiss of her fingertips. He started to hug and hold her tightly. She told him to let go, saying he had to deal with official business, and she had to get up too. Fairwind said Alfred hadn't come yet, but suddenly, Alfred, appearing from nowhere, told his master it was time to get up, and even if he got up and prepared now, he would already be at least 10 minutes late. Owen and the Duke looked nervously towards the door where Mrs. Tilly was calling Alfred, reminding him that she had told him not to disturb them. Fairwind got out of bed, saying he absolutely couldn't be late today. Especially today. The heroine also got up but felt a pain in her ribs. The Duke worriedly asked where it hurt, and she replied that someone had been following her all night, and she was tired. He asked if she was all right, if there were any marks, and if she wanted a massage. She said no, Marianne could do it, but he still had to leave. Fairwind suddenly asked if he was useless after last night, if he only needed to do this much. He would be very sad. What are you talking about? I didn't think that at all. Owen retorted, but the Duke continued, saying he had given her everything, and now she was kicking him out. He was sad that she had been so gentle last night. She told him to at least pretend to be really sad and try again. Fairwind said that instead of giving her a massage, he'd rather kiss her lips. Then he left, saying goodbye, see you tonight, and told her to take care of herself. He added that he loved her. Owen, shocked by his words, stood up and told him to leave quickly or Alfred would become impatient. She told him words were useless and couldn't bribe her. I'll be back soon, Fairwind said, closing the door. Owen lightly touched her lips, as if he had just kissed her, and whispered that she loved him too. A few days later, the farewell ceremony for Duke Leon Lilia's was held at the Imperial Palace. The Duke and Duchess of Carlisle were on their way to the Emperor's palace. Fairwind asked Owen what she was holding. She replied that it was a farewell gift for her brother, clothes she had picked out for Emily. She had chosen the clothes with Marianne, and there was also a scarf she had embroidered with her brother's initials. Fairwind looked at the handkerchief. Owen said she felt it was too much, and she didn't even know if her brother would like it. Fairwind told her that with his initials embroidered on it, he didn't think she needed to worry. Then, blushing slightly, he said he wanted a scarf like that too. Owen looked at him in surprise, her face even redder than his. A servant informed them that they had arrived. At the palace gate, Fairwind extended his hand to his wife, but Duke Lilias interrupted him, saying wait. Then he asked the Duke of Carlisle if he could at least accompany his sister today. They walked together, and Owen told her brother that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, so she hadn't been able to take good care of him. Leon asked her why she was apologizing. They had already spent enough time together, and he had also bought many gifts for Emily. She said she had also bought gifts and would give them to him before he left. Owen's brother patted her head and said what a good sister he had. When they entered the hall, Fairwind was already there, drinking. Duke Lilias laughed and said that meant Fairwind was suppressing his anger every time he generously allowed him near his sister. Owen asked him again if he was talking about Fairwind. Leon replied that the whole empire knew her husband was the most jealous man in the world, and then invited her to dance to prove it. Fairwind watched them angrily, holding his glass. As they danced, her brother told Owen that back in Wilma, she always stepped on his feet. He hadn't even thought she could dance so well now. Count Irwyne must be proud of her. I dance very well now, brother, Owen said. He replied that indeed she did. It was clear she had worked hard. The Empire's best musicians continued to play beautiful melodies. Duke Lilias and his sister, Owen, continued to dance. Meanwhile, Fairwind kept his eyes on her. Owen thought, he's just standing there drinking. What if he gets drunk? Wow. Owen thought, the way he's looking at you is terrifying. But suddenly, Owen started coughing violently and couldn't stop. Owen's brother asked her worriedly what was wrong. She thought she might have started coughing because she was too excited. Other guests began to approach her, asking if she was all right, but Owen couldn't say anything because she kept coughing. Suddenly, Fairwind rushed over, worried about her. He told her to lean on his back and sit down. "I'll take you to the bedroom." Owen said she could walk by herself, but Fairwind told her loudly to stop being stubborn. "No reason," Owen said, and climbed onto his back. The woman standing behind her watched and said, "My goodness, the Duchess seems to be having morning sickness." A girl next to her, hearing this, asked if she was joking. She replied that she wasn't. The Duchess was clearly unwell. The girl said that the reunion day wasn't that long ago. How could she have morning sickness? The woman replied, "Where is it written that couples can only consummate their marriage on their wedding day?" The Marchioness also had a child on her journey. The woman continued to gossip, adding that she knew another secret. She had seen the Duchess at a children's clothing store not long ago. She said the Duchess looked so adorable while picking out children's clothes. It was truly endearing. The other girls, hearing this, were shocked. So that's how it was. Another girl said. Fairwind asked Owen how she was feeling, if she was better, and told her to drink some water. She replied that she seemed to be much better. Owen told him to hurry back to the hall. Her brother was still waiting alone. Fairwind told her that His Majesty would take care of him, so she shouldn't worry. Owen asked him if he was all right. He looked pale. The Duke replied that he was fine and told her to rest. She told him she was already much better, but Fairwind suddenly said he wasn't. Then he said that his mother had died shortly after giving birth to him. The symptoms were mild, and the doctors said everything would be fine. But she weakened quickly and passed away within a day. Fairwind finished his story, saying that if Owen felt unwell, she must tell him immediately. Back then, his mother had only fainted once, and they had no idea how serious it was. Owen wanted to say something, but Fairwind suddenly embraced her, saying bitterly that she couldn't die like his mother, that it was impossible, he wouldn't allow it. Owen thought to herself that the Emperor's right hand, the man who remained strong even in the most difficult times, appeared so frightened and vulnerable before her for the first time. She hugged him back, comforting him, "Don't worry, I won't leave you." Duke Carlisle urged her not to be shy and to tell him anything that was bothering her. After a while, they went downstairs to the hall together. A young woman asked the Duchess how she was feeling. Owen replied that she felt much better and thanked her. But suddenly, the people around them began to offer congratulations, and Owen couldn't understand what they were congratulating her for. At that moment, the Emperor called Fairwind over. Owen nudged him, telling him to call her if anything came up, as she would be with her brother. "Or do you not trust me?" she asked him. He finally agreed, saying he would call her immediately if he felt unwell. As soon as Fairwind left her side, someone came up from behind and tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around and saw Duke Sibelius. He told her it was a pleasure to see her, then commented that she didn't look well. Perhaps he should embrace her and hold her in his arms. Owen replied that he shouldn't. She said she was fine, but Sibelius was persistent, taking her hand and saying it was a blessing to receive help from a man like him, pulling her along as he spoke. Owen pulled her hand back, suggesting they could have a drink and chat, as she wasn't feeling well, so he should fetch the drinks. He declared that she had finally accepted him. Duke Sibelius hurried off, telling her to wait. He'd be right back. Once he was gone, Owen thought to herself how disgusting the man was. She didn't want to see him at all, but couldn't ignore him because he was the Emperor's brother. Where can I hide until Fairwind returns? She wondered. Just then, someone approached from behind, startling her. She thought Sibelius had returned so quickly. It turned out to be her brother, Leon. He told her he had been thinking of rescuing her, but she had escaped on her own. They walked out onto the balcony together, and Owen asked him what he was doing there. Her brother said there were too many nobles, and he needed some fresh air. Duke Lilia then told his sister about a woman who was pursuing him, even though she said she was already married. "People are so different," he remarked. Owen laughed and agreed. She then asked why Duke Sibelius was always pestering her brother. Owen replied that it just proved he wanted not only Teresa's power, but Wilma's as well. Her brother asked what she meant. She explained that the Emperor had no sons, so Sibelius was the heir to the throne. Yes, Owen was right. Since the Empress couldn't bear a son, Sibelius would inherit the throne. Wasn't the Carlisle family also related to the royal family? She mused. Owen began to think, then asked her brother, wouldn't Fairwind become the heir? He replied that Duke Carlisle didn't want the position and didn't know if his own child would inherit the throne. He added that if Emily had a girl and Owen had a boy, then her son would be the next heir. That's why Sibelius is waiting for your contract to end, Duke Lilia has concluded. Owen asked worriedly if the contract stipulated that the marriage could be dissolved after 5 years, or if they could divorce if they didn't have children. Leon replied that it didn't. Because of the rumors about their troubled relationship, Sibelius was just waiting for an opportunity. Owen sighed in relief, saying, "Thank goodness." Her brother patted her head and asked if she was worried about not having children yet. He then reassured her, "Don't worry, you just had your wedding night." He then mentioned that the ball was ending and suggested they slip back into the hall. As the ball drew to a close, before her brother left, Owen handed him a handkerchief and asked if she had embroidered it for him herself. He said it was the first time he had received such a special gift and thanked her. Blushing, she replied, "You're welcome." Duke Lilia's turned to Fairwyne, urging him and Owen to visit Wilma soon, saying that if they had a girl, Owen should be the godmother, and if a boy, Fairwyne should be the godfather. Fairwyne replied that he would be delighted to receive the invitation. Suddenly, Leon added, "Let us know when Owen's belly gets bigger." Fairwyne and Owen asked him what he was talking about. Duke Lilia said he had heard what people were saying and that there was no need to hide the good news. He asked Owen if she was pregnant, leaving her stunned. The next day, we fast forward to Owen standing by the reception area door, eavesdropping on the postball chatter. Everyone is starting to ask if she's pregnant and if it's perhaps time for a public announcement. Owen's head is already pounding from the rumors. She wasn't feeling well to begin with, and now this. The Carlyle family is gathered in the reception room, and one of the elders asks how long it's been since the last news of a new edition. Since money was spent, there should obviously be a result. Fairwyne tells them not to jump to conclusions, as it would hurt Owen. Even if the matter is urgent, it's best to see a doctor first. Someone agrees with him and even volunteers, saying they know a doctor and can contact them. But Fairwyne says it's unnecessary. He will personally take Owen. He's barely left the reception area when Owen grabs his hand and pulls him away. She closes the door, and Fairwyne asks her why she brought him here so early in the morning. Does she want a hug or a kiss? But Owen tells him sharply, "Don't joke around." Owen asks what's going on and why all the elders are gathered together talking about doctors. He asks if she heard everything. Fairwyne says it seems the rumors about her pregnancy have reached the elders. She asks him why he didn't deny it. He replies that if she were truly pregnant, she would be fulfilling her duties as duchess, which would improve her reputation and elevate her social standing. Owen denies it, saying she isn't pregnant at all, and the doctor will confirm it. Fairwyne says that after their passionate night, it's still possible. She shouldn't rule it out. After all, they're a healthy young couple. Owen abruptly tells him that she's only just started having her period. They go together to see the elders and tell them that Owen isn't pregnant. Owen feels embarrassed in front of them, saying they came to see her specifically because they thought she was pregnant. Then she starts to cry, apologizing for what happened. Miss Tilly looks at her, thinking, "Oh my, the Duchess is crying." Fairwyne hugs his wife, saying everything is all right. They're young and they have time. One of the elders suggests that perhaps Owen could take some medicine recommended by a doctor. Fairwyne says not to pressure her, as she's already upset. He says he'll discuss these matters with his wife, and then leads her away. When they're out of earshot, Fairwyne asks her if it was difficult forcing herself to cry. She thanks him for playing along, saying they might have forced them to spend another night together otherwise. Thanks to their performance, they didn't insist on anything. She also says she's glad it's over. It was difficult because the people around her have too many expectations. Fairwyne sadly asks her if she truly doesn't want children. He asks her to be honest. If the issue of an heir makes her uncomfortable, then he doesn't want one either. Or, do you still find the idea of having children with me repulsive? Fairwyne asks. She looks at him angrily, then replies, "What woman in the world would spend the night with a man she hates?" He tells her that this proves she likes him, which is why she spent the night with him. Owen says she needs to make things clear. Fairwyne replies that if she doesn't say anything, he won't know. Owen thinks that it would be a lie to say she hasn't thought about having children with Fairwyne, but she's not ready yet. Then Fairwyne tells her that the issue of an heir isn't the most important thing right now. She knows him well enough, and she knows herself. Owen smiles and hugs him, thanking him. Fairwyne tells her that having children before marriage was too rushed. They weren't truly lovers yet and missed out on too much. They can always start over, like lovers often do, right? Fairwyne asks, looking into her eyes. As promised, Fairwyne begins to treat her like they're in the early stages of a relationship. Every morning, he comes to her bedroom and kisses her forehead. They eat dessert in the garden and sometimes take walks together. Every day is filled with romantic moments. A few days later, At the Marquis of Celestine's estate, the Duke and Duchess of Carlisle arrive for a visit. As they enter, Owen asks the Marquis if they should have arrived earlier. The Marquis says yes, but welcomes them nonetheless. The Marchioness compliments Owen's dress, asking if she bought it from Lady Bertan. Owen replies that yes, it was sent to her. As they walk into the main hall, someone calls out to Fairwin, long time no see. The man and his companion turn out to be Stella Bell, who also greets Owen. Fairwin suddenly exclaims, "My goodness, Romeo, after all these years, after so many winters." He then introduces the man to Owen as Romeo Montague, his dearest friend and the sole heir to the Montague family. Romeo greeted the Duchess of Carlisle, who politely responded, mentioning the imminent start of the performance and inviting him to sit with them later. As they sat at the table drinking tea, they began discussing the performance. Romeo mentioned that the Marquis of Celestine was not only the Empire's most famous opera singer. Fairwin smiled and said she was indeed talented, but not as much as his Owen. Romeo then asked if his wife could sing. He then looked at the Duchess, saying that a lady who could sing and dance was his ideal type. She smiled back and asked, "Goodness, really?" But the Duke of Carlisle was displeased. He stood up angrily and reminded Romeo not to forget that he should be pursuing Lady Bell, not his wife. He defended himself, saying he was only complimenting his daughter-in-law's singing. Fairwin sternly told him that she was not his daughter-in-law, but the Duchess of Carlisle, his wife, and didn't need the attention of other men. Romeo apologized to Owen, who said it was all right and not to worry about it. Stella Bell suddenly turned to the Duke and said that he had become more interesting since they played together as children, and that there was nothing wrong with caring for someone he liked. She recalled how, at the age of 5, he had become fond of a cat in the stables and licked it as if it were his mother. She confessed to having done the same, but Mrs. Tilly had been very angry and still remembered it. The Duke of Carlisle told her that it was just a kitten, and now he had a beloved wife. A while later, Owen and the Duke decided to waltz together. Belle and Romeo watched them, Stella commenting that they looked well suited. She remembered him as a child, but had never seen him so enamored. Romeo pressed her further, and she replied that she hadn't seen him like that since the kitten incident. Belle continued, saying that she was just a little girl then, and perhaps he wanted to take care of her. She quickly corrected herself and her companion, and Romeo said perhaps he did when no one was looking. But that dung fly is still hovering around, Stella said. Romeo asked who she meant, and she gestured in a direction, and Romeo understood that Stella was referring to Duke Sibelius. Sibelius was dancing with another lady, but as he watched Owen dance, he licked his lips. Owen's gaze drifted past the young man, seemingly aware of Sibelius's approaching gaze. Sibelius decided to express his admiration for their graceful dance, saying that a few beautiful verses had come to mind, and asked if he could recite them for Lady Owen. The Duke immediately put his arm around Owen, suggesting that the impertinent Sibelius recite his poetry to another lady. Sibelius replied that these verses were written only for Owen. His rudeness knew no bounds, and the verses flowed from his lips. "You are like the most beautiful flower, thorny yet still beautiful. You handle adversity with ease." But his poem was interrupted, Owen interjecting to ask if she understood correctly that these were verses of courtship. Sibelius leaned closer to Owen, whispering that he eagerly awaited her response. A moment later, the Duke's hand stopped Sibelius and pushed him away from his wife. The Duke, filled with anger, said that the verses were indeed beautiful, but there were more beautiful ways to woo a loved one better than his. Sibelius, intrigued, asked the Duke to demonstrate his prowess, since he was so clever. Carlisle extended his hand to the Duchess. In a moment, he had swept Owen into his arms and given her a passionate yet tender kiss, proving his point to Sibelius. Owen, clearly not expecting such a gesture, blushed slightly. Sibelius watched, and the Duke murmured that the most beautiful way he wooed his wife was to kiss her, because he had the right. Sibelius clenched his fists in anger and shouted that he had merely glanced at his wife. How dare the Duke insult the Emperor's own brother? Carlisle stopped him, saying it was much more than that. Did Sibelius really think he didn't know what happened when Duke Lilia said goodbye? Carlisle moved closer to Sibelius's face, warning him that if he came near his wife again, he would become an enemy of the Carlisle family, and he didn't care about Sibelius's relationship with the Emperor. Humiliated, Sibelius could only turn and leave. As he left, he thought only of that bastard Carlisle, and how he would make him suffer tomorrow. The next day, in the negotiation hall of the Imperial Palace, Sibelius loudly complained in the meeting that the nobles' taxes were too heavy and perhaps the commoners' taxes should be raised. As Sibelius spoke, the Duke, ashamed, lowered his head and asked if Sibelius knew that due to the drought, tax revenue had decreased, and in this situation, it was only right to collect a portion of grain from the nobles. Sibelius responded in a panic, saying the commoners were nothing but a rabble, not worth a second thought. He thought to himself that the Duke only wanted him to look good. Meanwhile, he started ranting about the necessity of immediately severing cultural ties with the Wilma Empire, claiming they were only giving and receiving nothing in return. Carlisle was extremely angered by all the hysterical woman's pronouncements. Everyone around them knew full well that it was Sibelius himself who had brought shame upon their circle. Carlisle decided to remind Sibelius of the not-at-all cultural banquet. Sibelius claimed it was all slander, and later even tried to use money to smooth over the banquet's impact, lest it cause problems between the two countries. Sibelius angrily shouted that since Duke Carlisle cared so much about the Wilma Empire, perhaps he was just trying to curry favor with Duke Lilia's, or that all of this was Duchess Owen's doing. Carlisle calmly replied that, of course, he always welcomed his wife's suggestions. After all, she was from Wilma and very knowledgeable about the arts. The gentleman observing their conversation heard Carlisle praise his wife, saying that thanks to her, negotiations always went smoothly. He added that he was very grateful that Sibelius recognized his wife's contributions to their shared cause. Sibelius immediately sneered, asking how easy it was for him to hide behind his wife's skirts and pretend to be noble. Carlisle, with a sly smile, pointed out that he didn't see anything wrong with it. After all, she was his wife. To completely crush Sibelius, he added that he would hide behind those skirts countless times if necessary. The Emperor ordered everyone to end the argument and conflict, suggesting they stop there. As they were leaving, Sibelius continued to harp on the issue of Carlisle being stripped of his right to the throne, his attitude extremely arrogant. To this, he received only one response. The Carlisle family was equally powerful, an undeniable fact. He still wouldn't let it go, raising his voice in front of the Emperor, behaving extremely rudely. Sibelius begged his brother to make him the heir, which shocked the Emperor, who couldn't understand why he would ask such a thing. Elvin Carlisle was only the sixth-generation illegitimate son of the family. Sibelius called him not a royal heir, but merely the descendant of a bastard. The Emperor, displeased by these words, questioned what he had just said about the great Elvin Carlisle. The Emperor confidently stated that truly valuable people knew when to remain silent, while true trash just ranted and raved. He added that Fairwind had already renounced his claim to the throne, and asked that the topic never be brought up in his presence again, much to Sibelius's satisfaction. But the Emperor's next words brought his joy to an abrupt end. He said that Fairwind had not stripped his son of his right to inherit. If Fairwind had a son, then he would naturally have the right to inherit. With a mother who was a Wilma Duchess and a father who was a Carlisle Duke, such a lineage would certainly be superior to Sibelius's. Sibelius only managed to shout, "Brother?" The Emperor roared furiously, "What brother am I to you?" He tolerated all of this only because of the late Emperor's will. The Emperor also reminded Sibelius to remember why his mother had been expelled from the palace, lest he be expelled as well. A few hours later, at Sibelius's estate, a wine glass was angrily thrown against the wall. Sibelius was plotting his revenge against Carlisle. If he were to make a move, it would have to start with making him divorce. As he pondered, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A servant entered the room and asked if his master had summoned him. A new ambassador would be arriving from Wilma tonight, and he was to be brought to see him once he reached the capital. The servant confirmed if he meant Count Rune. Indeed, Evelina Rune. She was the one who trained Owen when Elvin was sent to the Empire. The servant commented that because of the banquet incident, the Wilma people were probably reluctant to come, but Sibelius interrupted him, calling him a fool and saying that in such situations, money should be used to handle them. Sibelius thought to himself that Evelina Rune would definitely reveal something. Rumor had it she had once had a secret crush on Elvin. Sibelius thought this would be interesting, as he had prepared many good shows for Carlisle, and Count Rune was just the beginning of his entire insidious plan.